Okay, welcome to the next in our Catholic Intellectual podcast. Our guest today is Megan Murphy, who has a variety of backgrounds and interests in the church. So, welcome, Megan.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
So,
Should I
Megan,
call you doctor?
so can you start off by telling us about what your education was?
Okay, so my education has been in a Catholic education from middle school on up. I'm Jesuit educated. I graduated from the University of Scranton with a degree in English.
So, you didn't go to a Catholic elementary school?
I did go to, I'm sorry, I said middle school.
Oh.
You're correct. I did go to a Catholic elementary school. And, but my Catholic education, which is interesting, there's a very, very beautiful Jesuit that sort of recatechized me in the faith after a significant absence. And I also had the blessing of being very close to a very, very wise and holy man, Auxiliary Bishop John Martin Doherty, who has definitely formed the way I think about family and faith. I've also done a lot of study of the teachings on human sexuality in the church, faith, family, that sort of thing, on my own and with the help of others who have gone on for their masters in theology, etc. So mine's a rather informal.
So, how do you think? I mean, I would agree with that most of your education is informal.
Completely.
Even though you had a very solid formal education. So how do you think your formal education prepared you then for the informal education which came later?
Oh, wow. So I would say my formal education, at the time that I was extremely immature and I was going through a lot of hard crosses in high school. So I think my education was marked by just trying to get through and to learn how to deal with the pain and the hardship that was in my home at the time. It was marked by addiction, parents' addiction. And then in college, I was the architect of my own suffering. So during that time, I think education wasn't at all a priority in my heart or my mind. Pleasure was, comfort, ease. And so I pursued that instead of education. When I left the university, I went and sought some real help in 12-step healing circles, which were profoundly transformative. And I think that's when my real education began. Self-knowledge is an incredible gift. It made me desire to more seriously seek formal education. So I came back to the university and took very seriously my lessons then. Met some phenomenal teachers, learned to love literature, art, poetry, theater, and even learned to do the things that I found difficult that I didn't love as much. And so I finished up my degree, and then my seeking, I think, really began. Reading great church documents, reading St. John Paul the Great's apostolic letters and his exhortations, and Pope Benedict XVI's great writings. So I think it had to begin first with maturity and transformation and a willingness and a desire to seek.
So a good deal of your early education was in literature, and that was one of your first passions. Am I right?
Yes. Oh, yes, yes.
So how do you think a study of literature, which I think has been abandoned today, helped you to be able to learn these other things as well?
Well, I mean, it is definitely my belief that a person cannot begin to understand the transcendent unless they have an exposure to what is true, good, and beautiful. And the literature that I was privileged to be exposed to, including one of my favorites, Shakespeare, that certainly imbued in my heart this sense of awe. Of awe. And the arts do that for me, great masterpieces, whether it's music or it's the art. I look through at the Met. It instills a sense of wonder and awe. And I think that's the first experience of transcendence. So I would have to say that my love of great poetry, literature, theater, music, drew me to seek something, the source of that beauty. Drew me to seek the source of that beauty.
So what would you think your favorite book or a book that really impacted you in your youth was, as opposed to a piece of literature that really impacts you now? Has it changed?
Wow, that's a great question. And I would, if I were to be honest, my favorite book as a youth, I guess because of its writing and its just brilliance in storytelling, was To Kill a Mockingbird. I loved it. I still love it. I go back and I read it from time to time. That had a tremendous impact. And I think, how did it impact? I think it has some real eternal truths in terms of Atticus Finch captured my heart, you know? He was a man of profound integrity. He was a man of deep wisdom, and he was a man of few words. And I think he was something that I was longing for in my own life.
So when you read that book,
Yeah.
did you see yourself as Atticus, or you saw yourself as Scout?
Oh no, I didn't see myself as Atticus at all, but I longed for an Atticus.
You were thinking of yourself
Yes.
as Scout, and you
And I
wanted
think I
Atticus
was-
in your house or something.
Yeah, I think so. I think I was much more Scout. So I think I had a book crush on Jem at the time too. You know, he was just so spectacular, and yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But I found the whole family, the closeness, the beauty of the family in the midst of the loss of the mother was very attractive to me. And yeah, I think in general there was some deep truths about character in that book that I found very penetrating and beautiful.
Well, I think you could read that book very much as a Catholic book, even though it's not a Catholic book, but that the values and the ideas are highly Catholic, I think.
Oh, the absolute respect for the human person.
Yeah.
The genuine realization that every human person has just an intrinsic value and goodness.
Yeah, I think especially respect for the poor, in the sense, not poverty in the sense of money, but who were poor in society.
Absolutely.
People who had no power in society and who were very much powerless, and their lives were at the whims of other people. It was respect for them as human beings, which is a very Catholic idea.
So Catholic. I remember being struck too by Atticus Finch had a character in the early part of the book drop off a large sack of potatoes. And that was that man's means of paying for services that had been rendered to him by Atticus Finch. And I remember him protecting the man's, just the man's pride when his daughter came forward and said, "Oh, why is he doing that?" He not only cared, he didn't care so much about the payment, but he cared about recognizing the value of that payment, even though it never really met the services that were the cost or the value of the services that had been rendered. But he also knew that it meant a great deal to that man to give what he could. And another really great, if you think about it, another great way to look at Catholic mission and
So
Catholic
like the
service.
widow's mite in some sense, right?
Yes, he had great reverence for that. And I think he was trying to, I loved the relationship between Atticus and his children. I think he really does give us a beautiful model for fatherhood. I really do, because he had such reverence for a person, whether they were poor, whether they were, whatever race they were, whatever background they came from. Calpurnia was family to them. Calpurnia was family to them. And I thought that was really important. So, yeah, great book. Love that book.
All right, so what about a book now that you're an adult?
That's really, you're killing me. You're killing me, Smalls. You know,
Just something literary, not
literary.
theological.
Okay, not theological. Okay, wow. I love J.R.R. Tolkien's trilogy.
So,
love
I
it.
mean, can I say that you had these reversed? You're supposed to read Tolkien when you're 15, and To Kill a Mockingbird when you're 30.
Well, I've always done things backwards. I've always been backwards about things. Yeah, I think Tolkien's trilogy is just genius. It's just such a masterpiece. I
So
love
do you
it.
like his work better than C.S. Lewis?
Oh, don't say that. That's not nice.
You don't like it?
No,
You-
I'm saying it's hard. It's hard. Here's the thing. What I love about Tolkien is he has truths in his trilogy that C.S. Lewis obviously wouldn't have. They're real Catholic truths, okay? That trilogy is particularly Catholic, whereas C.S. Lewis gives us such brilliant and profound and deep insights into the Christian truths. Mere Christianity is just magnificent. The Great Divorce is fantastic. The Screwtape Letters is a work of genius.
I like the Screwtape Letters.
Screwtape Letters it's an incredible examination of conscience when you think about it. You know, you can be I can be sitting in mass and focusing on the perfume of the person in front of me and how I wish they had worn less perfume, and then immediately I'm thinking of myself in C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, where they're preoccupied with the people in the pew around them, and yet they have the living God, you know, right before them that they're meant to be contemplating.
I read that book every 5 years or so, and each time it's more impactful to me.
Agreed. And
because I think
you're in a different place.
Yeah, exactly right. I think it should be read every few years.
I could not agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think with Tolkien's trilogy, it's a story. It's a story, but it's the story. It's the gospel story. It's a story of salvation history. So you can find, you know, Mary in there and Simon of Cyrene and Christ.
Do you think a lot of people read that and don't get that at all?
Oh, I know it, because when I start talking about these incredible Catholic characters and Catholic themes in it, they're like, what? I have to go back and reread that, right? I have to go back. They'll say I have to go back and see the movie. I'm like, please first read the book.
Yeah. Well, I think he wrote it because he thought that his culture did not have any of these stories, that they didn't have the stories that were important to illustrate virtues.
Yes.
Right. So he thought he was going to write this to make this happen.
Yep.
Right.
And I think that even if the secular man does not realize why this book animates or inspires him, it's because we were all made for greatness. We were all made for greatness. God made us for that. I mean, obviously, for eternity, which is greatness. But in that story, we meet characters who are very little and very small and do great things. And I think that's the appeal. And I
So
think
they're hobbits.
brilliant. Oh, they're so great. So great. Not just hobbits, though. There are other people along the way who do great things.
But the hobbits are small. It was just sort
Yes.
of. So what about Shakespeare? What Shakespeare most impacts you, do you think?
Okay. I would have to say personally, just in terms of, I mean, I've read a lot of his works, and I'd like to read them more deeply with others who know more than I do. Measure for Measure is a particular favorite of mine because I was able to not just read it, but to do it on stage. Julius Caesar is a particular favorite of mine for the same reason. I've always loved. We started with my kids every.
Who did you play in Caesar?
I played Portia. Oh, yeah. Yes, one small, brief, but memorable. Small, brief, but memorable. So, I thought Measure for Measure was an incredible experience for me because the themes are so powerful, and the themes are also like, they made me think a little bit more deeply about my own judgments, my own prejudices, that sort of thing. Great play.
I love Shakespeare, but I think he's taught wrong in high schools in that they try to force students to read the play, where what they should do is show them the play.
Agreed.
After you see the play, then you want to read it so that you can get more deeply into what you saw.
So when we do it, when we do it in my family, when we're introduced, the way that we were taught to be introduced by our curriculum is to watch The Merchant of Venice and to read it, to then as well read the script and read it aloud if you can, because it's a performance piece. You know,
But in high school, I remember kids were reading and they would make us read it, but the kids didn't have the skills.
Yeah.
So it sounded terrible because, you know, some kid who had never read Shakespeare before was trying to read this really impassioned speech from Hamlet or something, and it just sounded terrible. You didn't get then you saw a real actor do it, and you thought, oh my God, this is why everybody is talking about this. This is wonderful, because the distance between us and the language is so great, and even the style we're not used to. Right? So
I think kids give up. I think they get discouraged. I think you're absolutely right. And I think part of that has to be like the teacher has to be willing to bring it to life. I mean, when it's brought to life, and also the other beautiful thing is if you have a teacher who can do some of the, I had a phenomenal teacher here at the university, and we plumbed the depths of like, what are the several meanings of that one line? I mean, when Shakespeare writes something, words aren't wasted. So one line can have not only the obvious meaning that the other character you're speaking to is supposed to get, but there may be a double entendre, or there may be a whole lot of other layered meanings. That's the brilliance and the beauty of Shakespeare, and that will be lost on someone approaching Shakespeare for the first time because the language at first is an obstacle for the student.
Even the references, I think, often are.
Oh, agreed.
There's so many, even I think, that a highly educated person misses.
Absolutely.
Because it's from so long ago.
And he's not introduced in our curriculum until we're studying medieval times. He's just not introduced. So he's introduced at a time when we're studying the very history of England in which he was writing, and it gave my kids some context as well. It gave my kids some context, and even a little bit about his life and what was happening in their culture historically and religiously. Important. It's important.
There's ideas out there that Shakespeare was a secret Catholic. Have you heard that?
I absolutely. I've read books on the topic, and I've heard. Well, in those books that I've read, some have proposed that he did receive the sacraments before dying. There is certainly evidence, certainly significant evidence that makes it more than possible to argue that issue, and I would say that one of the people who have done a really good job, Joseph. I'm trying to think here. I'll get his name before we finish, but. If you look at some of he's clearly interested in the religious issues of the day, and there's several works that would give a nod off to those who were being persecuted or those who had to hide their faith. There were a few nods, and if I can remember, I'm having a 53-year-old female moment here. I can't.
It's highly plausible because probably a quarter of the population was a secret Catholic at the time, right? I mean, it wasn't.
You weren't going to wear
it wasn't.
that on
But you couldn't say it. But
No.
but certainly many people held on to the old faith when the Protestantism was introduced by King Henry, especially because it wasn't like Lutheranism. A theological idea. It was just something being imposed upon them.
That's right.
For not very important reasons, right? I mean, it wasn't. He said, "Oh, the theology is wrong." It was just he wanted to get rid of his wife.
And I think we're living in an interesting, a similar type of time because people are telling you need to believe this or you need to think this way or you need to. Human freedom is an interesting thing. It has a very strong life, and I think that while someone can to your face say, yeah. No, that's right. They're going to hold very, very strongly onto what they believe in their heart, even if they don't have the courage to speak it with their lips.
I read an article that proposed that Romeo and Juliet was about this, because you know how it starts, two houses of equal value, that he was talking about Catholicism and Protestantism.
I've read I think I've read similar articles.
So he was saying that because he couldn't come out and say, "Look, there are Catholics and Protestants, and we should stop really hating. We should stop
warring
and hating each other over nothing, right?"
Yes.
Because when he talks about the two families in Romeo and Juliet, you never get a sense of why they hate each other.
No.
All you get is a sense is that they do hate each other. There's a feud. It's not. He never says, "Okay, there was this thing that happened, and this is why they hate each other so many years later." He's just saying they hate each other for some stupid reason.
But
and
isn't
what it comes
that what
down
makes it
is
eternal? I mean, we have that all the time. If you ask certain people, so why is there division there? Well, I don't know, but it's always been there in my family. I'm like, no, go deeper here. This is important. If you're going to hold on resentments that have been passed on, you need to understand the source because maybe it's not a very good resentment,
Yeah.
I think you make a great point, and I think that's quite possible in terms of Romeo and Juliet. But that's not
that was the
just
only way he could speak about
That's
that.
it. Oh, he had to use veiled language. He had to use it. But he does that even in terms of, I mean, he's been spoken about as body. Well, he's not body in the way that we're body in our culture today. Body in our culture today is openly lewd and vulgar, right? It's obscene. But Shakespeare had a way of doing it where you find yourself laughing at something and realizing, oh gosh, that's a good thing my kids didn't get that reference. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he was very talented at veiled language.
Yeah.
Very talented at veiled
So
language.
he could have easily veiled his discussion of Catholicism and Protestantism.
Absolutely. While bowing to the Queen.
Yeah. Well, I think the Queen may even have recognized that he was a secret Catholic and just looked the other way.
He was
right. I mean, you didn't want bring it out into the open because she wanted his place, but
Right.
and didn't really care because he wasn't a political figure.
Right. As long as he entertained.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if he had become too bold, I'm sure we would have had a different end to his life. But, his works are just brilliant. I mean, Julius Caesar is political. He does get a bit political, and
But he does it in a way that doesn't offend the politics of the time.
bingo.
Right. So if you said it in ancient Rome, you're not talking about.
Oh, you'd have been executed.
Yeah, you're not talking about the politics of the day, even though it's obviously about the day, right?
Right.
So you could hide that. So each group thinks, "Oh yeah, I'm the one that's in the
He's
right."
speaking for me.
He's speaking for me, right?
It's funny how that goes. But yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
But I don't think there was ever an author who was so skillful with language. And that's why I think he endures so much. But I think also what we forget is he wasn't writing this to be written down on a piece of paper. He didn't. I mean, that's why you don't find intact copies of Hamlet or something.
Right.
He was writing like even
It
when
was performance. It was a
it was
performance
performance.
piece.
It was
Yes.
a performance piece, and even the actors didn't get the entire script. You got your cue script, right? So you knew the line that came before you, and then you got your part because they weren't going to. They didn't have a typewriter or a mimeograph. Now we're really old. They didn't have a copier or a printer or something. You had to write it out. So nobody was going to write all this stuff out, right? So there might not
Thank
even
God
have
they
been
did. No.
an enormous copy, right? It copy came later.
I
But
have to tell you
if
that.
we don't do it as performance, we're missing 90% of what this is supposed to be.
That's exactly right.
And you need
Well,
skilled actors
that's,
to do
I think, yeah, and you do. You need skilled actors or just orators. I mean, some of his sonnets are very beautiful. They're poetry. And one of the things that I think is lost in education today, part of the curriculum that we've used, is this idea of learning to speak well beautifully written word. Beautifully written word. The sonnets of Shakespeare are part of what my kids had to encounter and then memorize and then perform. And there's something to that. There's something very beautiful to that. And then as we were going through each line, them coming to a deeper understanding of, oh, that's what that means. Oh, my kids have, as a consequence, grown to love, especially Isabella, really grown to love Shakespeare. Mom, I really love Shakespeare. The scenes between Isabella and her brother in prison in Measure for Measure, there's such rich dialogue there. They're fantastic. But again, they only leap off the page when you put two people in the same room and they're hashing it out. They are hashing it out,
Yeah.
So
But I also with his persuasive speech, like in Henry V when he's giving the speech before they go into battle, which has to be one of the best speeches
Kenneth
ever.
Branagh, you've got to see it. You've got to see it,
I've seen
John.
it, sure. He did it better than anybody.
It's extraordinary. And that is literally, I remember my kids starting to read Henry V and being just, and the term that comes out of their mouth is, this is boring. And then you put on Henry V with Kenneth Branagh and you're like, is it still boring for you?
Yeah.
I mean, how about now?
That speech is just fantastic.
It's
right?
magnificent. But it's particularly good when it's well done.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, I'm trying to think, Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson and Much Ado About Nothing. Is that the one they did? Yes. You can tell which actor in that particular movie is comfortable with Shakespearean language. There are some that are absolutely brilliant. Michael Keaton is fantastic. He's just fantastic. And there are other actors in that where you're like, ooh, their training just didn't involve.
Yeah.
They're not sure what they're saying. You can tell who knows what they're saying, and you can tell who doesn't know what they're saying. And that's kind of, it's an interesting thing to watch. It's critical to understand, that's why when I was here, I remember Joan Robbins getting a dramaturg and saying, no, let's talk about the times. Let's talk about the history, and let's talk about what it was. What did he mean when he said this? Because there's a sentence here that really ties in what's been happening in the history here. So it was fantastic. It was a lot of fun.
But when you hear that speech, war is a terrible thing, and I despise war. But it makes you want to go off and fight the French, right?
He could have inspired anyone to pick up a weapon.
Right,
It's
because
true.
I think often it's criticized as being pro-war, but I don't think it was. I think the way I read it as in a struggle. We're all in some struggle, right? And it's sort of time to stand up and do something.
Confront your fear.
Yeah, confront the fear, because
you really.
And he says, somebody says, "Oh, I wish we just had all these other people from England here," and he says, "No, all we need is the bare minimum," right? I think that's the kind of thing that John Paul said about the church. Don't worry about your numbers, right?
Worry about the holiness.
Worry
of the
about
members.
worry about the integrity of what you have.
That's it. And I think there's something to this. That it's he's inspiring people. I mean, if you want to put in theological terms, if you want to put in scriptural terms, he is inspiring those men to confront and overcome their fear of the cross. And it's like, go to it, battle it. And I think that's an important message even for young people today who are who don't want to do hard things. Who don't want to do hard things. We have a culture that's gotten so comfortable because of our affluence. It's so convenient, not necessarily healthy or good for us, but convenient. We want a really, frou-frou coffee drink. We just have to go through a drive-through. We don't have to get out of our car. We don't. So think about it. We live.
Not that you don't like frou-frou coffee drinks.
I
because
do,
you do,
my friend. I do. But the idea that we've lived a life with a great deal of ease in it, that doesn't necessarily build character, and it makes confronting hardship a lot more difficult. And I think that speech that Henry gives is like, no, this is the task we've been given. This is the task of our time. And we need to go forward.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, he's telling them that they have the power to do this, right?
That's right. It's a great speech for any freshman who's starting college who's just like, what am I doing here? Come on.
But it is. But more than that, he sees it as an opportunity. This is an opportunity.
That's right.
This is your opportunity to be great in the sense of doing something important, making the world better, doing anything like this. So forget about the fact that you might die and think about this as an opportunity for you to really do something, which I think is a profoundly Catholic idea.
I was just going to say that. Listen, every single cross that comes our way can be perceived as either, and always is perceived as either an obstacle or an opportunity. And I know when I first confront that hardship, whatever it is, whatever suffering that comes my way, I see it as an obstacle because I see and I encounter its pain. But if I press into it and I don't flee from it, by confronting it, by engaging and entering into the battle, transformation happens. Okay, I do die. Hopefully, whatever it is in me that needs to die does die. But there's a promise of something greater at the end of it. And so, yeah, I think it is a great metaphor as well for the Christian life, no question.
You should really write something about that speech and its relation to Catholicism.
I think you and I should really write something. That's a task we have before
But
us.
after I watched Kenneth Branagh do it, I looked on YouTube for every version I could find.
Yeah, I don't know if you can find a better one.
His was better than everybody's.
I thought it was
Even
phenomenal.
people whose name were bigger than his in terms of, you know.
Yeah, and those other performances are valuable to watch because there's different approaches, and they brought out nuances that I appreciate. But Kenneth Branagh's, I thought, really spoke to me in the time I live in. Really
Also, I think that the camera work and everything was better than
So good.
so that it was you could see his face,
and
right?
his anguish. And
So
his,
if you were
yes.
looking, on a stage and somebody was far away, you couldn't get the subtlety of a lot of things,
Yes.
right? But this with the camera work and everything was so fantastic.
Filming is so much more intimate. It always is,
Yeah.
you know? So it does bring about a more intimate encounter.
Yeah, film. I mean, it's possible to say theater is better than film or film is better than theater.
It is.
They're two different
Agreed.
things.
That's right.
They're two completely different things.
And I think that's why it's been fun to see Kenneth Branagh. But I know the experience in a theater is so powerful because you're removed enough that you're going through an emotional experience with the character, but it can be nice and private. You know what I mean? It's in a sense it's harder to watch. Think about how many times you've encountered somebody that's sad and you're sitting in your living room with your kids and you just don't feel like crying in front of your kids. You're just swallowing it down. You know what I mean? In a theater when it's dark, it's a little bit easier. I think it's a little.
I remember taking kids from the higher achievement program. So some of these kids were pretty rough, not all of them, but some of them. And we would take them to a play in Philadelphia or New York. And for most of them, it was the first play they'd ever seen. And we would take them to a play that you would think, this is not going to hit well with these kids, like Dreamgirls or something, right? This is not anything in their world whatsoever, right? Singing and dancing, like for kids, in the streets of Scranton. And they would come out like singing and dancing. And it was so transformative for them. And if beforehand you would say, oh, this is about, these young women who started a performance career, and they would say, oh, I don't want to see that.
Who cares?
But at the end,
Right.
they were walking out singing the songs from the show
Yes.
because they had never experienced that amazing wonder of being in a theater.
Yes.
Right? So it's really I don't like when people say, oh, I like theater, not movies, or movies.
No.
They're
I
two
think
different
both
art
are-
forms.
Agreed, and I love theater. I mean, honestly, I love theater. I will say that I think that gets to the point where John Paul the Great said, culture is built by the arts. And if the culture is a broken culture, it's because something profoundly broken is happening in the arts. And when what can literally transform a culture is great music, art, and literature. I mean, it makes sense. The first thing that a government that is corrupt does when they want to oppress a people is to try to remove culture. And so it's a beautiful thing when you take somebody who's never encountered theater. It's an incredible thing to give that child an opportunity to walk in and say, here's some beauty, or here's some great music, or here's a great story, or here's good storytelling. Phenomenal gift. Phenomenal gift.
Well, that's what both the Nazis and the communists did. The first thing they did was say, okay, we're going to remove all the things from our culture that don't speak to our message.
And also that speak, I mean, I think they wanted to also remove the memory of the beauty of the Polish history. I mean, I think John Paul spoke about, if we remove all reminders of who you are, we can mold you into what we want you to be. And John Paul said, no. We must remember who we are as a people, and we do this through poetry, through literature, through music. And one of the things I've said to my daughters recently, I said, look very carefully at music and look very carefully at film. There's a lot of remakes. And I said, what does the Holy Spirit do? But the Holy Spirit is the Spirit that creates something out of nothing. And what do we know about the adversary of God? The adversary of God, he can't create anything new, or original or unique. He only can take what has been created and twist or pervert it, right? So the Holy Spirit, on the other hand, needs nothing. Like, if I'm going to make something, I need some ingredients, I need some raw materials, but not the Holy Spirit. And so I said, it's interesting that we're living in a time where continuously you're seeing reboots, remakes, read this, read that. It's almost like we've abandoned the Holy Spirit in our pursuit of the arts and our desire to create something. We're saying, stay out. And so he will. He won't go where he's not invited.
I like that you say that, because I annoy my wife by saying I refuse to see any remake ever of anything. And I always say, come up with your own idea. That's not yours to do, like to politically correct in your vision.
Right.
So it's, I'm going to make Citizen Kane, but I'm going to make,
my version of
the way it should have been, right? But it's not your idea. It's not you leave it alone, right?
Yes.
Come up with your own idea. Come up with your own, if you have a message, come up with your own story to tell that message.
Yes.
Not go back and change someone else's.
But it's funny, we've done this even with Shakespeare for a long time. We've modernized Shakespeare, which has its place, I suppose, and its purpose, because some of his writings are applicable to our times, right? So we've done it a lot with theater. We've done it in particular with Shakespeare. I have a harder time with a lot of, like, when my daughter will send me a song, Mom, you're gonna love this. This is so danceable. Wait till you, and I'll send her back the original and be like, hello. This is the OG, my friend, and it's funny, but my kids didn't even know that song existed in my time, and they're suddenly starting to look at some music in a different light as a consequence. Like I said, go back to the real beginnings of music. Go back to the thing I find tragic is how many kids today have exposure to music and how few of them have ever heard any really good, amazing music. Okay, they have Spotify, they have Apple Music, they have iTunes, they have all these opportunities for music. And if you look at their playlists, many of them will have never encountered Mozart, Beethoven, Bach. It's really sad. Yeah. It's really sad. And so if they encounter them, their experience after having heard so much of today's music is, oh my God, this is terrible, I don't like this at all. Well, right, this is the transcendent. And if I believe in terms of the arts, if you're getting a steady diet of kind of just low-end, common music, then you have a hard time attuning your ear to transcendent beauty. And I think it's critical in education to expose people to the masterpieces, not only in art, in music, in cinema. My kids love the old movies, but why? Because there was a lot of new stuff that just did not get played in my home. It did not. And one of the things we'd have to say is, okay, is the true, the good, and the beautiful present? That doesn't mean it was puritanical. That doesn't mean we couldn't, there's the opportunity to watch things that have content that's a little bit mature and deep, but to hold off if it's not age appropriate. But there's too many great pieces of art, literature, and music being missed by today's young adults and youth. And that, I think, is wrong. I think that is
I don't even think that today's youth even see the cinema. It's too long. A 2-hour movie is too much for them.
But you can see the gradual. Can you see the gradual?
Them.
Yeah, you can see the gradual disintegration. I mean, think about it. We start with Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart, and some of them have even spoken very specifically about the eternal. Handel's Messiah, Mozart's Requiem, Pie Jesu. You can see it starts with the transcendent. Now we're going to do a massive fast forward. Bach, oh my goodness,
Beethoven,
that's
they
Pie
all
Jesu.
wrote, and Mozart, they all wrote masses.
Exactly. So you start there, and now take a massive fast forward, right? When we started to hear, okay, you could even go to the time of Frank Sinatra and Perry Como. There's some really, they still speak about love. they're not speaking about agape, necessarily godly love. They're talking about romantic love, eros. And then you can go and keep going forward, and then you get into the 70s or the 60s when the sexual revolution began. And now we've even taken out the idea of like holding hands by the gate, by a gate, by the light of the moon. And it gets, I can't get no satisfaction. Okay. Like then it becomes me-centered. And now you can fast forward to today's where some music is literally piecemealing women or men down to body parts, right? Yeah. So you can see the gradual disintegration from transcendent love to now it's just utilitarianism. And you can do the same with art. I think you can do the same with art. And that's why I think the important thing, and when you said, what's your favorite literature art, I love so much of the beautiful old masterpieces of literature, art, and music, because kids can't spot a counterfeit if they haven't been exposed to the real deal.
Mm. What bothers me about education today in terms of music and is that very few students today can play an instrument or can sing.
That's so tragic.
Where when we were kids, almost everybody could play something.
That's right.
And, and
was encouraged to do so.
And you were at a college party, somebody pulled out a guitar, somebody could play the guitar, right? Now nobody can.
Right.
And nobody, so as a singer myself and a cantor, I'm always looking for young people who could sing, and there are so few of them who have any idea about singing. They never sang in a choir. They never sang, in a group. They've never. So in other words, they've never even taken like a piano lesson or something. So they have no idea about the construction of something beautiful.
I think there's two things there. I think there are two things there, and the two things I think that are there, and it kind of ties into this idea of faith and family. C.S. Lewis says. I think it's in the Screwtape Letters when he's laying out his plan to break down the Christian's belief. He says, first I will make of the world a cacophony of noise and busyness. First I will make of the world a cacophony of noise and busyness. And if you look at the way that you and I lived, it was much noisier than the way our grandparents lived, right? Because suddenly we had TV. They did not. They had radio. And then if you look at the way our kids are living, add to it all these screens. And so C.S. Lewis is prophetic. He's prophetic in this statement. And what happens is we have kids now who are so noisy and busy with technology, even if they don't have social media. And social media has been proven again and again and again to be so toxic. I mean, watch The Social Dilemma. Read all the studies. If parents aren't encouraging their kids to altogether get rid of social media, then they're misunderstanding education and their role as primary educator. And say you've done that. You still may have a child who does not sit around and practice piano. Why? Because there's plenty to scroll on YouTube. We found with our daughter, she had no social media, and she's not interested in having social media, which is a very beautiful thing, but she did have internet. And the moment we decide to say, hey, we want you to do an internet fast for 3 months and just see how it transforms your life and see what it does for you, and come back to us and tell us, that she was not happy. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that was an experiment that she went into willingly, because that would be a lie. But the truth is, she had to go into it because we asked her of it, and we ask hard things. She has said, and this is only a month in, oh my gosh, I'm reading so many more books, Mom. And she's back playing the piano and practicing, even when she doesn't need to practice. She's back playing the piano. And so I think part of the problem is we have placed obstacles in our children's lives to them choosing better things. One, by putting a phone in our hands, we're doing it. By putting an iPad in their hands, we're doing it. So we've got to take responsibility as educators and primary educators of our children in saying, okay, there are higher things. I can't I can't just say, put that phone down and do it. Well, maybe they need help putting the phone down. We've put it in their hand, So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think athletics has an incredible potential to teach the human person great things. Great things. Doing things when they're hard. Like cross country, it's hard. A lot of kids do not go out for cross country. It's a miserable experience when you're running and you don't want to run anymore and you still have a mile to go. It's hard to get kids to join cross country. Why? Because it's a difficult, painful sport. But persevering through pain is a magnificent spiritual lesson. So I do want to say that athletics have an incredible opportunity to teach our kids to persevere through pain. But the other point is, I think we've come to elevate athletics over every other thing that schools offer to the student's detriment. And I say we've actually elevated athletics to a religion now. And instead of worshiping God, we worship sports and sports
in
teams.
the same way, I think it's passive because the kids aren't playing sports anymore; they just watch them.
Agreed. Oh my goodness, that's so true. Some kids are playing, some kids are excelling, some kids are participating. A large majority are watching.
When I was a kid in Old Forge, for example, we had 6 Little League teams. We had a crappy stadium, no lights, no nothing like that, and we had 6 teams and like 2 or 3 minor league teams, like the little kids. Now, Old Forge has 2 Little League teams. Wow. The population of the town is the same.
Right.
It's just that kids don't want to play. They don't want to actually go out and do it. So they might watch the Phillies, right? But they're not going to actually do it.
Which is so sad.
Right? So that the sports culture has gotten bizarre. Right. It's more important for you to play sports than to watch sports.
And the other thing too is, okay, if your child is genuinely not gifted athletically, and that is not their thing, at least teach them to get exercise. I mean, that's important. Physical education, the mind, the body, the spirit. But also find out what their gifts are and encourage them. That child that's not good at baseball or basketball might be a brilliant violinist, might be a magnificent thespian or great on speech and debate. But so few kids are choosing these options as opposed to scrolling. Right?
There's a wonderful thing. It was done by Kurt Vonnegut, and I can't remember the details. But it was essentially, he was talking about when he was a young man, and he said to somebody, they said, what are you doing or something? And he said, well, I don't even remember what you're doing, but let's just say, make something up. He said, oh, I'm playing the guitar or something, but I'm terrible. And the guy said, oh, that's fantastic. He said, it doesn't matter if you're good. This makes you a more well-rounded person to go out and do this thing.
To try it out.
So it's better,
yes.
and I say this all the time, it's better to try these things, and you don't have to be a concert pianist to enjoy playing the piano, right?
Yes.
As you know, you've learned instruments. When you play, hot cross buns on the piano for yourself, it sounds better than Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, right? Because it's
well, maybe when you play it.
No, it gives you that sense that you've done something. Right, so the same thing with sports. It's good. It's good to be on a sports team. So you're the worst player there. That's fine. Are you learning things? That's why I always like baseball, because baseball you have to work as a team.
Right.
There's no, like in basketball you could have LeBron James on your team and you could just keep giving him the ball and he could dunk it, right?
Right.
But as a kid, I mean, not in the NBA. But if you're in baseball, you could be the best player. You're playing shortstop. You catch that ground ball. You still have to throw it to some kid at first, right? He still has to catch that ball for you to make this play. Right, so a great player can still make a difference, especially a pitcher or something. But you really learn to support everybody on your team, because that stinky kid in right field, the fly ball might come to him at the critical point of the game, and that whole game depends on that kid catching the ball. Right. So you really learn how to support each other, right? Because if you don't support each other, you're not going to win.
No. Another good point there too is, I think it's consistent with your point. When my daughter, we got a call from a neighbor of ours, and she said, Meg, we see your daughter's running all over Dunmore. We need people on cross country. And I said, well, my daughters said they're not fast. They just go out for like mental health exercise, for exercise for their body and for their mind and their spirit. And her response was so funny. She's like, I said, my daughters think that they're not going to kind of really be very helpful to the team because they're not fast. And she said, at this point, Meg, we need warm bodies to cross the line. I mean, that's how desperate they were to get people on the team. But here's what's interesting. While my daughters were right in saying, okay, we're not going to be the fastest people on the team, they started out, and their time was whatever it was. I won't reveal that. I might get really in trouble with them if I do. Each time,
think calendars instead of stopwatches.
Each time, their coach would say, "This was your time. Now beat that time. This meet." And they had a completely doable task. And what was fantastic was that he literally has made my daughters better runners, because he has said, I'm not worried about you coming in first. I'm worried about you getting better than you did the last meet that you were in. As a consequence, my daughters have taken several minutes off of their time from when they first began. And each year they think, okay, I can do it again. I can take more minutes off. And they've gotten more serious. There's a beauty in that, because there's a lesson in the spiritual life about that. You do it when it's hard. but you do it as best as you can. You do it as well as you can. And in a great way, they have been an asset to the team. My daughter's, she has brought a really positive spirit. I remember the coach said, like, your daughters are a delight to have on the team. You know, when a kid is just got a bad attitude, you know, my daughters have on a kid, like, hey, knock it off. Like, come on. You know, like, get out there and do your best. And you shouldn't be in it just for you. This isn't about you. This is about, so I think there's other things in terms of athletics, like teaching people great attitude and great character. When someone thinks it's not a big deal to lie or to gossip or to tear down, you know, my kids have been really aware of, like, their need for courage and saying, that's a good person we're talking about here. You know what I mean? So I think also team athletics, speech, all these activities have an ability to build character, form character. But I will say this, Steve, and I think this is an important thing to say. One of the things we see, and we haven't talked a lot necessarily about faith, our family, is that one of the things I see in terms of the family is that a lot of these activities have replaced what I think God intended, which is the communion of persons of a given family unit. What do I mean by that? I mean Megan, Neil, Abigail, Natalie, Isabella, Hannah, and now the beautiful added blessings of Andrew and John. What does that family unit look like? And so if I'm constantly farming my kid out to activity, and those persons never get a chance to encounter one another, they have no experience of communion of persons. And one of the biggest complaints I hear about the Catholic Church today, and I think it's a valuable and it's an accurate complaint, is the lack of community. True. I mean, there's a truth in that. But I will say, in every instance, the lack of community you experience is the fault of its members in that parish. What does that mean? How many of us really spend time talking to each other after Mass? Why? Well, we gotta run our kid off to soccer practice. We're running kid off to so some of these activities, while they are good, are they the highest good? And that's the question we need to start asking. One of the things Bishop Doherty, and I got to tell you, Bishop Doherty has been one of the greatest. Auxiliary Bishop John Martin Doherty, who has recently passed, has been the single greatest formator in my life. He and there have been other brilliant formators in my life, but I'm focusing on him right now because he really played the role of director and I think spiritual father. And he would say to me, Megan, if you're serious about pursuing God and becoming holy, or pursuing holiness for your family, then the devil's not going to be able to take you down or your family down by offering the choice between a moral good and a moral evil. No, because you'll see through it. He's going to present two moral goods. One is God's will for you and one is not. And the discernment comes down to, what is the will of God for my family? What are we supposed to be doing? And I think there's been a real loss in the world of A, silence, and B, community. Silence and community. Communion of persons. And I think I think the Italians get this right. That Sunday family dinner, that is communion of persons. That's the person's first encounter with church, the domestic church. And I think families, I know the families I'm talking to, so many of the families I'm talking to are like, oh yeah, no, we haven't had a family meal and I'm like, what? That's tragic. Fix that now. I had a young man from Montrose come to my family's house, and my daughters we were having dinner. It was a regular Thursday night. It was after my daughters, at the time, I think they were doing soccer. And he came back to our home. He and his friends, two friends, came back to our home. And they sat down and we had roasted chicken and potatoes and string beans. And I know you're in awe that an Irish woman actually put a good meal out on the table. I had a little help, but yeah, it happened. And when he sat down, he's like, how often do you do this? And my girls looked at him like, what do you mean we eat dinner every night? And he's like, no, like a big dinner like this. And we're like, big dinner, this is just dinner. And they're like, you mean like you guys sit down and eat dinner like this every night? And I said, yeah, we do that. And he's like, oh my gosh. Oh, we do this at Thanksgiving. Oh. And my kids were just stunned. There's a kid who has no experience of domestic church. How do we expect them to bring communion into the universal church? He cannot. He's had no experience of it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this idea of family is critical. We're talking about activities, and we're talking about athletics, and we're talking about the beauty and transcendence of great literature and poetry. If we don't, as educators, as parents, first instill in our children a sense of wonder and awe in the community members that they've been given by God. That's family members right there. Boom. If they don't get that, they're going to miss the encounters elsewhere. They're going to, I mean, that is vocation right there. Your family, the domestic church, the people you're living with in your own home. I have heard kids talk about their siblings and they have nothing but contempt for them. Okay, well, then going to Mass on Sunday is kind of a sort of a superstitious exercise, because we have to learn to begin virtue in the home. And that's the difficulty I'm seeing. Why is the church so fallen? The church is so fallen because virtue begins with the people that Christ has given us right within our home to love. You know, I would say it starts at a young age when the kids are fighting over the same thing, and I take it away and say, hey, when you love a thing more than you love a person, you're getting it wrong. The thing goes on top of the fridge. The person that God put before you is the thing you need to love most. Person you need to love most, I should say. And so that's formation. And then the formation, you know, and us supporting that person when they're going through a hard time and they become difficult to love. You know, that person's going to become irritable and angry and ornery and lash out, and how do we encounter that person? So I think before we can get to athletics and how we can fix the world with culture, we have to actually go back to the family, because I see before the disintegration of culture, I see a real disintegration of the family. Okay, and this isn't my brilliance. This is John Paul the Great. I mean, I'm not. I have nothing new to offer. I have nothing original. You talking to me about this topic is hilarious, because I'm only repeating the brilliance of two beautiful people in my life, and that would be John Paul the Great in Familiaris Consortio, and also Bishop John Martin Doherty, who said, until we get the family right, the culture doesn't stand a chance. Civilization doesn't stand a chance. You know, I think our families are too busy and too noisy. And I think we have to do things that are unpopular with our children in order to reclaim family.
But as I said, I think they're busy with stupidity. They're busy playing video games
video games,
and
yes,
you know, looking at Twitter or something. It's not like they're busy because, okay, your father's working in a coal mine like it would have been 100 years ago. They're busy doing things that are pointless.
And why are they that busy? Because we have created that environment. We've been the ones that have put things in their hands that make them too busy or too noisy. And so we have to play the very unhappy game, the unhappy responsibility of removing those things that prevent them. Here's how serious this is. If we're to talk about family, and we're to talk about, you know, Mother Teresa of Calcutta has this little thing, and when I first encountered it, I was like, oh, that's rather simplistic. And then I thought deeply about it. I'm like, oh, Mother Teresa, you're way deeper than I am. She says, the fruit of silence is prayer. What does that mean, really? That means if there's no silence in your life, there's no prayer. There's no hope of prayer, okay? The fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. So she's saying you can't have faith without silence, because you don't get to prayer without it. The fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. And then she says the fruit of love is service. In the meantime, we have tons of institutions and organizations that say, let's get our kids involved in service work. They have no prayer life. They've never encountered the living God. So what is it? It's social work, which is a good, but it's not the highest good. In order to get them to the place where their service is self-giving love of Jesus Christ, they have to first encounter Christ. But they've had no experience of prayer. So how do we do that? We have to remove the obstacles to prayer. And this is where John Paul was starting to see this, I think, in the family, and saying, go do Eucharistic holy hours of adoration. It's the one place left in the world where you can go into a church or a chapel and there's absolute quiet, and an encounter with the living God. And I think families that are serious about fostering a Christian atmosphere in their home have to take seriously their responsibility, their obligation to foster times and places of silence within the family unit, right? And in addition to silence, that silence, why do I say that? Our Mother Mary, you say, like, well, you know, look at the Holy Family. Yeah, they had it easy. She was perfect and he was God. You know what I mean? She had an easy kid to raise. But they had tremendous obstacles. You know, think about
including
this.
People trying to kill them.
I was just going to say they had their child hunted. Like, yeah. I'm sorry, but that's serious business. You know what I mean? They had to go to foreign lands. They didn't know the language. They had to set up businesses. He had to set up a means by which he could actually produce income to feed his family. These were real problems. She had to deal with a relationship in which she was pregnant, and the guy she was going to marry had no understanding of how she got pregnant. These are real life, real world problems. How they get through them? Prayer and contemplation. If Joseph hadn't been one who contemplated, that saving of Christ would never have happened. He stuck around. That's why Christ was saved from Herod. He was there to get them out of to get them into Egypt. And so what's interesting is that all of this contemplation and meditation and pondering, it says with reference to Mary, and she pondered these things in her heart. There's this reference to pondering. What is pondering? We're taught in the catechism, it's the heart that prays. Pondering is mental and contemplative prayer. This is an art that isn't even taught, okay? And it's taught brilliantly in the Catholic Church. Father Mark Toups does this magnificent program called Oremus. It's available through Ascension Press, and no, I don't work for Ascension Press, and no, I'm not doing a commercial for them. But the program was transformative for my kids, and we did it within our own home. We took our job as primary educator and said, okay, how can we teach our kids to pray? Because we weren't really taught how to pray this way. And each of my kids have now run that program out of our home with their peer group and introduced Lectio Divina, prayer with scripture, imaginative prayer, discernment of spirits, consolation and desolation. What are these things, and how do we understand them? And I will say that if Bishop Doherty gave me he gave me so many gifts. He gave me so many gifts. But the thing he gave me most was a recognition of how can you ever discern between the two goods that you will be faced with? Should I get busy in this ministry job? Where do I belong? And so many times I'd say to him, Bishop Doherty, I just got offered this job. And he'd say, no. I would say, no, that's simply. And he goes, there's someone at home that needs you. And if it takes you away from that person in need right now, it's not from God. No matter how good it may be. Oh, you may think, it's going to bless this one and this one and this one. But if it robs you of your practice, of your vocation as a mother at this time, it is not from God. And that was a profound, profound lesson for me. He was really good at saying, okay, Meg, take this ministry because your kids are in a good place and your husband's very available and there's nobody in crisis and there's nobody on the cross right now that needs you to be their Simon of Cyrene or their Mary at the foot of the cross. Go and do this. There have been long periods in which I have said no to this job or to that job. Why? Because my daughter is on the cross and I needed to be Mary at the foot of that cross. I needed to be Simon of Cyrene, who said, I can help you carry this. And that good, while it was a good, it wasn't the highest good. The highest good was loving. How does my daughter know that she's loved, cherished, and walked with if I as a mother don't do that? If Neil as a father does not do that, right? So it goes back to the vocation of motherhood. It goes back to the vocation of fatherhood. And now we have family that is far more interested in pursuing their careers and making their name known and making a little extra money. And there's nothing wrong with all of those things are beautiful because I think the intentions behind them in the heart are very, very good. But they might be the lesser good if the child at home is a difficult child. Press into that relationship.
Well, there I think you're coming back to the idea of the two goods. Making money is not a bad thing,
no,
especially when you're in charge of a family, right? You say, I want to make more money so my kids have more opportunities and all of this kind of thing. That's a good. But if it's taking you away from the good of being a good parent, then it's not a good.
That's right. And I think there's a temptation. I will say this. I think there's a temptation in family life. When I started being a mom, Steve, I remember thinking, I don't know where I got this idea from. It was just in the air around me. It certainly isn't Catholic teaching. I definitely fell for prosperity gospel thinking. It was if you love Jesus, everything goes well with you. I'm not kidding you. If you love Jesus, then you won't have any problems financially and you won't have any hardships with your children. And that is such a load, okay? It's a load. Part of the reason why God permits hardships is that we might lean more intentionally into union with Him. So we learn that overcoming them is only done in and through Him. The financial hardships Neil and I have had in the beginning of our marriage have literally been blessings. Because I've literally said, God, how are we going to do this? We have this problem, this child has a need. How are we going to do this? And no, it's not vending machine Jesus mentality. It wasn't you put your dollar in and you get your Snickers bar. I put my Our Fathers and my Hail Marys in, and now I have a check sent to me. Yeah. No, there have been times when God has actually done that just to remind me, I'm the provider, Meg. Stop fretting. But the truth is, He's the one that opens that door of provision, right? So turning to Him is a good because he can open the door of provision. My husband got painting jobs, or my husband got this or that. Now, in reference to the cross, when I say, prosperity gospel, I really had this naive idea that if you prayed and you prayed together as a family, then your family would never have serious problems. That is a lie. It denies the reality of the fall. And there is only one family who actually kind of, and they don't get exempt either because Christ is the one who literally redeems. But the fallen nature, what happened in Genesis, is happened in the hearts of every human being. And consequently, every family is going to encounter very grave and very serious hardships. But there, again, it goes back to those two things. Is it an obstacle or an opportunity? It can be an obstacle to our faith where we shake our fists in righteous indignation and say, seriously? And sometimes that's reasonable. I love when there's a podcast out right now on Exodus that's really quite brilliant. And Father Dave Pavanka from Franciscan University of Steubenville and Jordan Peterson are speaking about the book of Exodus. And he says the Israelites go from tyranny, the tyranny of the Pharaoh, into the desert where they're bitten by snakes. And you can understand why they might shake their fist at God and say, seriously? Really? I mean, the tyranny was better. Why'd you do this to us, Lord? You know? And I think that we have that experience in family life. Like, seriously? This hardship? This child? I've done everything I can. I've poured myself out. But you can be angry at God and try to do it on your own, and well, that experience will be a whole new level of misery. Or you get to encounter God in that hardship, and he can just show you how great his power is. And he does that by imbuing you with his power. So then you have to face your fears. You have to confront them. I love when they said, you know, the snakes weren't taken away. God could have done that. He didn't do it. Snakes weren't taken away. And they didn't even cease to be bitten.
He just gave them the cure.
God allowed them to continue to be bitten. They had to confront the source of their fear. Like, the idea of being bitten by the snake was terrifying because it had the capacity to kill them. No, they had to look upon their fear and say, in you. Okay. It was also obviously symbolic of a number of things, you know, and the podcast is brilliant. Go look it up. It's fantastic. You'll want to hear it. But here's an example given. Our fears about our kids, you know. I've seen so many parents walk away from a hard kid and just say, like, they're impossible. I just can't deal with them. Well, then you're walking away from Christ. That child is your encounter with Christ. Will you love that child when that child is making it hard? Children can make it very hard. Parents can make it really hard for the children. And the reality is, I love when Bishop Doherty said to me, Meg, it's easy to love when they get along with you and they do everything the way you want them to do it. But that's not love. When your husband is making you angry and hurt, when your child is making you hurt and causing you pain and angry, can you go back in there and can you pour yourself out as gift? And can you turn around and forgive? Then we get into the Christian mystery.
You're making everybody who's listening to this feel guilty at this moment.
That's what he did for me. And it was the greatest gift he ever gave me. No, you want to know so funny? Here's so funny. I remember going to confession to him, and I had just been absolutely horrible to live with. A whole week of just racked up sins where I had been just a miserable person, and I had been difficult. My poor husband had survived me, and my poor children were trying to survive me. And I went in, and I was so sick of myself, and I had confessed to Bishop Doherty my sins, which were many. And I looked up at him, who had heard my confession every week for the last every week, yes, for the last several years. I looked at him. I said, "Is there anything I've forgotten?" Okay, I'm asking him, "Is there anything I've forgotten?" That's how I asked him. He said, "Yes." And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, "Contrition." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Well, Meg, it sounds like you're sick of yourself. And you're sick of how your sins have hurt you, caused you pain. But have you given thought, or have you pondered the way that your sins, your defects of character, your flaws, have caused others pain, and above all, God pain?" I began to bawl. I just began to bawl. And it was a magnificent gift he gave me that day. Because then I started to look at the way that I've apologized to my husband in the past. And there are times when I've gone up and I'm like, "Neil, I'm sorry. Guess what's not true?" then I'm sorry. Why am I saying those two words? Because I want to clean my side of the street up. Like, okay, check box. I've done that. I've done what I have to do. I've said I was sorry. But the whole interior life of the Christian is there contrition to go with that sorrow? And I see in families, okay, this lack of responsibility to that obligation as a Christian to be sorry, one, and two, like I've called my kids out and said, there's only one thing wrong with that apology, and it's just that you're doing it just to say you got it done. You're not really sorry, but I accept your apology.
It's just lacking in apology.
It's a lacking in contrition.
Yeah.
It's lacking in true, genuine sorrow that like, hey, listen, I love you, and my relationship with you has been hurt. It's suffering because of that situation. You know what I mean? Then you get into the beautiful, deep truths, I think. And so Bishop Roy never, ever said it to make me feel bad. He always said it to me to call me to the highest good, to call me into something deeper and better. I am learning to love in my marriage in a more real, a more genuine and profound way because he's called me out on that. Oh, so you said you're sorry. How'd that go over? Because you're not sorry. You know, like, it's just like, yeah, that's true. You know what I mean? I've had to look at conversion accompanies sorrow if it's genuine sorrow. You know what I mean? And so you get into, that's character formation. When your kid comes up and says sorry to their sister but then continues to treat them poorly, well, then there's something like, no, there's a virtue. What is the Christian life but a life of virtue? It's not a life of words, empty words. It's a life of virtue. And I see Catholic Christian parents struggling with imparting virtue in their families. Forgiveness, I think, would be the biggest one. I think that's a real important one, and we struggle in our own home, and we where would we be without the forgiveness of God? So, like, even here's the thing, I hear there's a lot of mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, these forgiveness issues, you know, they're big, they're deep, they're very real, right? They're very real. But I want forgiveness from my daughters, whom I've hurt. Okay, I would love to say that, you know, oh, they gave me a rosary, they gave me the sacraments, and I mothered my daughters perfectly. If you interview my daughters on any given day, you will find that is false, grossly
maybe
false.
that's a future podcast.
Right? Oh yeah. I could fill books, Steve. I could fill books. But what I think is important, Bishop Doherty said, I remember saying to him, I'm so afraid. I was crying my eyes out, and they were little baby. I'm so afraid I'm going to screw them up. And he looked me dead in the eye and he goes, you are. It was the greatest thing he could have ever said to me. He said, listen, if you do this thing perfectly the way you want to do it, they'll never have any need of God. If you do it perfectly, you're not going to. You're going to screw them up. And the reason God is going to permit that is so that they might have need of him. Wow. That was like, oh, wow. And then the second thing in that beautiful statement is this. Because my daughters have such a deeply flawed mother, they have multiple occasions on which they have to learn to forgive the way God forgives. She hurt me. She got it wrong. She should never have spoken to me. That she shouldn't have been mean that way. All of that is true. Now, what are you going to do with it? And you can get bitter, or you can get better in holiness. And that applies to my relationship with my mom or my relationship with my dad. And so what do you do? And it's really funny. I think Father Mike Schmitz was one. And certainly 12-step healing circles really press into this and do it brilliantly. And they'd say, take a look at that debt, the debt that person has done to you, the harm, the hurt. Weigh it up. Put it down on paper. Write it down. What did it cost you? Look at the cost. And then decide if you're going to hang on to that cost. Or you're going to turn around and say, this thing that has caused me deep pain, I ask you, don't hold it against this person in the same way that I ask you to not hold what I've done to anyone else. Don't hold it against me. We say this in the Our Father.
Oh, yeah.
We say this in the Our Father. But how many people think deeply or ponder, like, how am I breaking that? You know what I mean? When I say, forgive us our debt, our trespasses as we forgive those, I think, oh, Lord, have mercy. No, don't do it that way, Lord. Be more merciful to me than I have been. You know,
there was the story of the mother. I forget who told the story, but the mother was saying the Our Father with their children. And when they got to that point, she pointed to the one daughter. You don't say this part, because she hadn't forgiven her sister for something. So just because you're calling down wrath upon you. Just wait till we get to the next line. Okay, now you can join
there's
up
a
again.
as well.
But I think we say it so casually.
But I
Right.
so agree, and I think that's the point of like this idea of Christian virtue. When we talk about parents as primary educators in your home, I would say we must. I mean, we're concerned about curriculum in other schools. We should be. We're concerned about programs that are being promoted. We should be. We're concerned about the lack of the transcendent, true, good, and beautiful in the curriculum. We should be. But also this idea that we're supposed to tolerate each other, it's a lie. We're supposed to love one another. This idea that we're supposed to...
I've always been bothered by that term tolerate.
It's a
because
lie.
I tolerate a toothache. Tolerate means there's something wrong with the other person.
Right.
If toleration means that there's something that's annoying about the other person, like a toothache, right? I tolerate the toothache. It's just pain. That's a very low bar.
Amen.
What we're supposed to be doing as Christians is love the other person.
Yeah,
That's a much higher bar.
It is, and it has in its essence a recognition that is a creature of the same God that made me. We've set the bar so low, and we're not even just called to love the person. Here's a real mind blowing concept. You know, people talk so divisively in such ugly terms on all sides about one another. The Christian is supposed to be loving their enemy. The enemy. Okay, think about that. Like, you can think of lots of those, right? You can think of, even in terms of politically, who politically you don't line up with, or who... The Christian is called to will the good of that person, to want them in eternity, and to pray for all God's best blessings and superabundant grace, His superabundant grace, mercy, and love to be poured out upon that person. That right now you have feelings of just absolute ire towards, and so in the wake of so many ideologies that preach tolerance or preach, you know, I had a young man call me, beautiful man, and it's interesting, biracial guy who called me up and said, I've just been asked to do a talk on racism. And I said, this call is kind of funny. I mean, you're calling me who about this. And he said, no, it's really important to me to get your perspective on how I go in and I do this in a Catholic school. And I said, well, I don't have all the answers, but it seems to me that when you boil down all the isms, feminism, racism, all of the isms, they boil down to one particular sin, and it's the golden rule. It's lack of love of neighbor. And why don't we just get down to that principle? And what people say, well, you know, what is love? What is love? Love is love. No. Love is in 1 Corinthians 13. There's a very clear, love is first, patient. And if you understand the word patience in the Greek, it's long-suffering. It's long-suffering, but patient. Bishop Jordan used to say, Mrs. Murphy, do you know what the word patient means? I'm like, oh no. It means long-suffering. I'm like, oh, good heavens to Betsy. Okay, so love is patient. And then we get into kindness and it not being rude and it not being bloated or inflated. It not being egotistical. It willing the good of the other. And I think... we begin that in the home, Steve. We got to begin that in the home, Steve. We got to teach our children to love that person who's on the TV, who makes our blood boil. Hey, let's pray for that person. You know?
So we're an hour and 20 minutes in, and I'm going to ask you.
Sorry.
I'm going to ask you the first question I have written down.
Yeah.
What's your last comment led to?
Really
After an hour and 20 minutes,
really
it's the first. We get to the beginning. But the first question I wanted to ask about this faith in the family is how is the faith transmitted to children? So you have 4 children and you've homeschooled them as well, which most families do not,
right.
And also most families do not have the means to,
which is reasonable, which is okay.
But
not every family's called to it.
So how do you transmit the faith from you to your children? Because I think the faith will not exist if we don't transmit it to our children.
Agreed.
So it's more than just transmitting virtues to them, like saying,
right.
you know, don't hit your sister, don't do this. And it's more than just saying, okay, we as a family go to church on Sunday, so you have to go, right? There's really, how do you transmit that fundamental faith to your children? Okay,
so the first thing I have to say is you asking me questions on faith in the family would kind of made me giggle, because I thought to myself, like, why didn't you ask a different family? One that hasn't asked the Holy Family. But I'm literally, again, I just have to say this. I don't have any wisdom on this. Other than that's which has been borrowed, and borrowed from beautiful people like Bishop Doherty, who would say he borrowed it from people like Pierre de Caussade or Thomas à Kempis. So I say that first. I don't have all the answers. I don't have any answers, but whatever answers I have that have been given to me, I can share. And it's the wisdom of John Paul the Great, Familiaris Consortio. I can point you in that direction. I can point you in other ways. The only thing I can tell you is how I've transmitted the faith with their help. And how I've transmitted the faith with their help, a couple things. One, it has to be a lived faith, right? So while I'm introducing certain concepts, I really believe, and I'll say this first and foremost, rules without relationship equal rebellion. Rules without relationship equal rebellion. If you tell your kids, memorize these 10 commandments, but they've never had the experience of God's goodness, then they're going to perceive rules as coming from this authority that they don't know, that's distant, that's a little scary or not warm or unwelcoming. And they're going to get this idea that I had growing up, which is like God was with his thumb hovering over the smite button. Here's a bunch of rules. If I break the rules, like you get it now. And I think there's real harm done that.
I think that's absolutely true, because when you see people who've fallen from the faith or become anti-Catholic, anti-religious, or whatever upbringing they had, they often say, well, they told me this rule and I didn't want to follow this rule.
All the time.
It's all the time
it all
what
comes
it
down
is.
to that.
But
I've been given a list of doctrines and a list of rules and a list of,
I didn't want to do this.
Oppressive is put in there too.
Yeah.
Oppressive rules.
But I think if you have a real relationship with God, you don't say, I'm following this rule because this is the rule. You have a relationship with God and you want to get closer to God, and you know that doing this activity is going to separate you from God.
And I think experience of the love and the person who wrote the rules, a loving encounter with the rule maker makes the rules at first it makes them bearable, and then it makes them beautiful. And so there's one thing we can't give our children. We can't give them that relationship. That's where parents throw their hands up in the air and they go, oh, then what are we to do? We put them in a place where they can find God. Here, I think this is critical, and I robbed this from Father Mark Tubes. No, you can't give them that searing personal encounter with Jesus Christ. You cannot, but you can put them in a place where they can encounter it. And what do I mean by that? This is where you got to get rid of the busyness and the noise. You need to take them to holy hours. You need to make time for them, intentional time as a family for prayer. You've got to, whether it's liturgy of the hours, or you sit down and you just read the scriptures, the daily mass readings for the day together in the morning before they start, or you do the family rosary and you're like, oh, this is so boring. Right, but there's something deeper here. There's something, it's a hard prayer, there's no question. You say to them, yeah, it is. I find this prayer very hard. Yes, this is a difficult prayer, but it's a mountain mover. It is a mountain mover, okay? And I always tell them, this is our time to pray for others, right? But getting them to holy hours, taking them into a church, even if adoration of the Blessed Sacrament is not happening, where the Blessed Sacrament is exposed in a monstrance, even if all just that tabernacle's there, take them out of the world into the quiet, and just sit here and say hi. That's my kids' experience since they were nursing infants. They were going to holy hours and going to the church and sitting in quiet. I didn't give them encounters with Jesus, but I made sure they went on retreats. I made sure they went to youth conferences. I made sure that we had times of prayer, and I made sure they had times for silence. And I loved to go into the local church that was open and sit in there. And that's why it's crucial that our churches remain open. So I know, yes, we have to teach them the doctrine, and we have to help them to encounter it. But it's far more palatable if they've had these glorious experiences of quiet and prayer. And God reveals himself. He unveils himself differently in each child's life. Some encounter him more intensely through hardship. Some have encountered them through retreats. Some have encountered him through both, like through all of it. But we've got to put them in a place where he can be found. Mm-hmm. Okay? And he's got to be found, as Mother Teresa of Calcutta's model for us, in silence and in prayer.
I think the whole problem with the rules idea is that they make it seem like, well, if I do this, then I'm no longer a Christian. But everybody sins, and everybody. Yes. The whole point of Christianity is forgiveness and redemption, right? So it's not like, okay, you say, like some of the teachings of Christ are difficult. Like, okay, if you just think about this woman in an impure way, then you've committed adultery in your heart. Things like this.
Oh gosh,
well,
yes.
well, people do this, right?
But this is-
but then
I
okay,
love what
you
you're
have
saying.
you have to understand. Okay, this doesn't mean I'm going to jail and I'm doomed forever, right? Or that
Or
I have to
hell.
hate, or that I have
Right.
to hate myself, or
right.
feel bad. No, just he's giving you the ideal to aim for.
But also, I think in this, and I think this is so critical, the beauty of sin, if there's any beauty in sin at all, is that it's an opportunity to encounter God's mercy. Okay, if we don't have any need of God's mercy, then we never get to experience it. The beauty of our weakness, our failings, our sins, our littleness, is that when we have fallen, when we've broken the rule, when we've disobeyed, when we've experienced this as parents. One of the beautiful things, like when our kids don't do, so and here's an example. You say to your child, listen, no, I don't want you doing whatever. I don't want you, I don't want you doing that. And I want you going on on the computer. I don't want you, and you come in and they've gone on the computer. They encounter two things. One, discipline, consequences for their behavior. But two, mercy, forgiveness. That in and of itself is an actual physical experience of what we get to experience with God. If we never sin, we get to know. That's why he says, he who has sinned much loves much. You know the love of God. You know you've been forgiven so many times. You're like, God, here I am again, the schlep. You know the schlep that you created that keeps walking away from you when you've done nothing but love me. And then again, you get to experience his mercy and his love, which is so ongoing and so endless. That is the beauty of the encounter. And I think that part we didn't get growing up when we got catechesis. I don't think, and it's not, I don't fault the people who taught me. I may not have had ears to hear. Maybe they were teaching it and I just didn't have ears to hear. Maybe I just didn't care. I mean, it just sounded really boring, the rules when I was getting confirmed and I had to learn all these things and memorize all these things.
Well, if
It
you
was
start
just
with the rules,
stuff.
you don't see the point of it. And
You
sometimes
don't.
you don't even understand what they're talking about, right? As a child, you're not faced with the same temptations that you are as an adult,
Right.
maybe. And you just think, well, what do I care about this? Right?
Bingo. It's not relevant to my life right now.
Yeah, so then it's hard to explain that. But I think
Which is why faith is never we covered that in 6th grade. No. Like these rules or these doctrines or whatever, it's constantly formative in my house, because when we encounter like, okay, so you're struggling with, maybe the child is struggling with lustful thoughts. Maybe we use that as an example. Maybe the child's struggling with lustful thoughts. In my home, I know this is shocking, crazy, but the kid will be like, what do I do? Like I did. Okay, they've actually been able to come and speak to me about it because we've actually given them beautiful materials that help them understand that. I think that's critical. Like people like Jason Everett, who've made it so accessible for young parents, the parents who don't know how to talk about these topics. He's made it so accessible through his books to talk about these issues.
I think most parents don't want to talk about these topics.
Right,
It's
or don't know
uncomfortable.
how and don't have the language, or feel that because they schlepped it up when they were young, they have nothing to offer their child who's trying to do it now. And that's false. That's a lie. They
But even
still
if, like young people in my family will like hint towards a question like that, I always ask your mother, because I feel like I've done this. I've had these uncomfortable.
No, buddy, you
I've
can't
had these
shirk. You can't
uncomfortable
shirk. I'm
conversations.
sorry, I'm calling you out on that, buddy. You are the father. The father has as
No, I'm
much
saying no.
responsibility.
I'm saying if it's not my children, if it's like nephews and nieces
yes.
and something like that, it's like I don't want to have to deal with
That's
this.
so funny because
Just-
I have everybody's nephews and nieces coming to me for
Yeah,
questions.
yeah.
about
Just
that. Yeah.
so I'm glad that you're
And the
there to
parents
do
have
that.
sent them, and I'm like, hold on a minute. Your father and mother need to get in on this conversation.
I think if
So-
the parents sent them, I would
Yes.
treat it differently than
Yes.
then I just don't, I don't want to have this difficult conversation.
But I also think it's a beautiful thing what you do. What you're doing is you're pointing them back to their primary educator. It's not the school and it's not the church. We as parents are the primary educator.
You make it sound like
So
I'm doing
we're
something good.
supposed
I'm
to-
just doing something lazy. I deserve no merit for this.
Well, God still blesses. God still blesses what you're doing.
But like when you said before about poverty and things like this, I think the one thing that this does for you, you say you don't get the check from God. So you went through times in your life when you were poorer than you are now, and I went through a long period of my life where I was just too poor. I had to pay for my own education and all this.
And
kind
of course,
stuff.
we're talking American poor.
American poor.
Not African poor.
But
right?
feeling like, okay, I don't have enough
Feeling the
money
pinch.
to do this, and I think what that gives you is an appreciation for other people who are poor, right? So when I was poor, I worked harder than I do now,
Right.
right? It's just it was the circumstances that I was in that caused the poverty, right? And you could say, well, you worked your way out of it. Yeah, that's true, but I see young people and I see them trying to work their way out of it. I want to help them because I know what
That's
it was
right.
like.
Oh,
I have
right.
and the same thing with sin. If you're looking at somebody who's struggling with some sin, and you think, yeah, I struggled with that sin, and you could understand this is not a bad person because they're doing this. They don't need to be condemned. They need to be helped. And you could think, what kind of help did I need to get through this, right?
That is the heart of mercy.
Right. That
right
is,
there, Steve. Stop. That is the heart of mercy. That's what Jesus. That's the person that our children need to encounter. The person of Christ who is the heart of mercy. I cannot agree with you more. And I will say that there's a danger. The Christian life is all about balance. I think it might be Aquinas, it might be Augustine. Virtue is the mean between two extremes. So, the parent, I say this all the time, the parent who only loves and practices no discipline, what do they produce? They produce an unbearable, unruly child that no one wants to be around. I mean, they're just entitled and spoiled and oh gosh, you've seen these kids. You know what I'm saying? Oh, give them what they want. That's not love. First of all, it's not love. It's a counterfeit. But like the child with no discipline is just, it's a difficult child to be around.
It's also laziness. It's
laziness.
It's
horrible.
Parent, right?
It is.
It's easier just to give in and
that's it.
Give them $20 to go to the movies and you don't have to deal with it.
My gosh. And they make the child unbearable, and so they keep giving that child more things to get the child out of the parents. But
sometimes that's a mistake out of genuine love. It's a mistake. It can be a mistake.
Agreed, 100%. The other issue is too much discipline and no love. And if you have too much discipline and no love, you have a child that's neurotic. You're going to have a child that is neurotic, does not know that it has a purpose and God has a plan for it and it has a place in this world and that it has goodness and it has. So it's interesting. One is not enough. Both are critical. And I apply this to the spiritual life. God the Father is all mercy. And you could say, well, he's so merciful that the rules don't really matter. But that would be a mistake. And the beautiful thing is that he's saying, no, the rules are your highest good. They're like guardrails. That's like you saying, well, the guardrails don't really matter. I mean, I don't really need the guardrails. Well, 3 people have plunged off that cliff to their death. So I put the guardrail up there. Why? To help you, to prevent you from plunging off to your death. One of the ways we talk about those guardrails with the 10 Commandments, I always call them guardrails. They're for our good. They're for our protection. I used to say to my girls, we're never really bitter about the 5th commandment, especially when it pertains to us, like thou shalt not kill. If somebody's going to be banging down my door and wants to kill me, I'm really grateful God put that in place. And if the person has at all a well-formed conscience and it deters them from killing me, then that's a good commandment. Nobody's going to argue with that commandment, right? Yeah. Okay, but the harder ones, like you said, you brought up the 6th commandment, like lustful thoughts. There is naturally, because of concupiscence, that inclination towards sin, there is a gap between where the law is and where my heart is. Sometimes I don't even want to, I really want to lust after that. You know what I'm saying? There's a difference between our desires and where the law is. So what do? Do you shake your fist at the law? I've done that. It doesn't work. And in college, I just threw the law out. I was like, okay, that's one of the commandments that is optional. Like, I'm not doing that one. I don't care. Then what happens is you end up unhappy. Deeply, you're the architect of your own suffering. You find out, like, God put that there because he wants you to experience the weight of your own dignity. And you can't do that if you allow people to use you, right? So he puts this law there, and what do? You narrow the gap, and that's the work of a lifetime in some cases, and that's the work of the Christian. So what do? Well, confession, I'm struggling with this, I'm falling and I'm failing. Encounter the mercy of God there. You might meet him in prayer or communion, and you take 2 steps forward. And then you sin again, you take a step back. And then you go to God in his mercy, and you take a step forward, and you pray, and you ask him for more grace, and he gives it to you, and you take another step forward, and then you take 1 step back. So if you watch my hand as I'm going 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, what are you watching? You're watching spiritual progress. Not spiritual perfection, but you're watching spiritual progress. And then eventually you get to the place where that law is no longer impossible for you. It's no longer oppressive to you. It's no longer a burden. And you experience the law that used to be so heavy as this great experience of freedom.
I think it's an incredible misunderstanding of that rule, in that what it's saying is you can't treat another person just as a thing for your physical pleasure. That's right. This other person is the image of God as well, just like you. And I think our culture today has elevated this thought to everybody else is just there for your personal pleasure, right? I mean, that's the lowest point of our culture, that you're not recognizing other people as having intrinsic value. You're thinking, how do these people make my life better? Even, people genuinely who want to say they want to make their life better, but if you're only trying to make your life better and don't care about the other people, that's not a good. That's this.
And no
false
good's
good
going to
again.
come from it. I mean,
No,
a self-centered life, it closes in on itself. It
Yeah.
does not, I mean, it absolutely closes in on itself, and it cuts others off. You're not going to experience freedom and happiness in that.
That's what I think. The people who reject religion based on they don't want to follow rules, they look at this and they say, well, look at these people following rules. I think I'm having a better time than they are. Like, why don't you just sleep in on Sunday instead of go to church, or why don't you just do this? But the reality is, like, on Sunday, I don't think I wish I could sleep in. I'm excited to go to church. Like, once you've experienced the relationship with God, everything else pales in comparison.
That's right.
Wealth and fame and everything else you might want. You have a relationship with God. That is the apex, right? So if you don't have that relationship, you just say, these people are just following these rules, and I don't want to follow the rules. But they're missing that.
That's it.
They're missing that. Okay, it's like when you look at somebody else who's in love. So person A is in love with person B, and you think, why do they even love this person? First of all, they do this wrong, they do that wrong, and now if they just weren't in love with this person, they would be better off financially, or they could pursue their career more openly or something like this. But you don't know, because this person is in love, and you don't understand that if you've never been in love with a person. So if you see somebody in love with God, you don't understand that until you've had that relationship. Until you have a life of prayer, you're thinking, why do these people pray all the time? Right? And
That's a relationship.
That's a relationship.
It's a heart of relationship.
So you say, if you don't have that relationship and you've never been in love with God, you don't know how that feels, and you don't know why they're doing it.
Right.
So then you think, well, if I don't understand that, then I don't understand these rules, right? Maybe I want to cheat somebody in business and take their money, right? They give justification for this, right?
We'll see how that works out.
They'll say that's a bad person, so I'm taking his money, or something like. Yeah, I mean, whether it's literature or news or anything else, this always ends badly.
Right. I was going to say, here's it, at the heart of selfishness. John Paul II said, the heart of all marital, he was speaking about marriage, the heart of all marital sin is selfishness. And I think that's almost applicable to the heart of all, even sin in the domestic church, in the family, is selfishness. When you care about yourself above and beyond everything else, you're going to end up unhappy. I mean, here's the thing. Evidence, just plain old observation of a person's life is going to reveal that. That's very simply done. It does. We shouldn't take a lot of wisdom to observe that, like, a life of selfishness, it may lead to pleasure, and it may lead to gratification, but it will rob you of joy. And there's a big difference between joy and gratification and pleasure. Gratification and pleasure lasts as long as the activity that you're engaging in that brings you pleasure lasts. Joy is a gift from the Holy Spirit.
It brings remorse after that.
Right. Or self-contempt or contempt of other human beings. But joy is a gift of the Holy Spirit. That's an entirely different encounter. That's different. Happiness is different. And you went back to marriage, and I want to pause there for a minute when you talked about this person loving this person. One of the things John Paul says, and Bishop Doherty would say again and again and again to me, was, your means, Megan, the single most important means by which God has made it possible for you to enter into relationship with Him in eternity, is Neil Murphy. He did that by virtue of the covenant of marriage that you engaged in. The other means of your sanctification is the fruit of that union. Abigail, Natalie, Isabella, Hannah, and now my two beautiful sons, John and Andrew. What he means by that is, that's where God wants us to learn to love well. And you brought up, well, you see this person's defects, you see this person's weaknesses. Maybe this person has an addiction. Maybe this person is suffering, encountering a time of profound anger, or, personal truth. I struggle with temper. Since I hit 53 and I'm female, or 50 and 53, I find myself more edgy and more irritable, especially when I first get up in the morning. And, there's two approaches to that in marriage. Neil tried one, like, let's see if we can fix this problem. Megan, have you gone to the gym? Megan, have you gone to the gym? Megan, have you gone to... Yes, I've gone to the gym. I've been on the treadmill. Yes, I've prayed. Yes, I'm eating well. I'm getting out. We're going to sugar. And then there was this approach where I turned to him and I said, Murph, what if this is the best I have to give right now? can you love me anyway? And it was a profound moment in our marriage when I said, Murph, if I'm struggling here and this is all I got and this is the best I've got for you right now, can you just practice forgiveness 70 times, 7 times a day? And in that moment, I encountered the love of Christ, because Neil was just like, oh, I have to stop fixing you. I've stopped trying to fix you and just love you. Okay? That's a very concrete example. And it's profoundly deepened my affection and my love and my respect for my husband, because he looked at me as like, okay, I've been trying to fix her. Now I just have to just start loving her. And his kindness towards me, in spite of my irritability, guess what it's done? It's softened me. It softened me. That's the gospel. That's my point. That's my point. And that child who is lashing out, that child who's lashing out or lying to their parents, or the parents can be like, okay. That's a natural human reaction, and we're all going to do it. That's natural. But once we've tried that out and it's actually increased our suffering, then leaning into that child and trying kindness and long suffering and not rudeness. Okay, this is a work in progress. I'm still working on this in my own home. This is what I'm called to every day in my home, and I fail regularly at it. But being able to press into that mystery of like, am I getting 1 Corinthians 13 right with my children when they're acting in a way that is difficult? If I'm not, then I still got the lovely opportunity and invitation from Christ to be more like him and die more to my selfishness, which is like, listen, if you could not be so difficult, my life could be easy. But God's saying, no, I don't want it to be easy. Remember that part where I said, deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me? This is where it's at. This is the heart of it. This is the heart of the gospel.
How do you deal with then the thoughts that you might say, maybe I'm not up to the task? Maybe I'm not up to the
I take it right to confession. I've gone to Bishop Dory and said, I am lacking love in my own home. I have literally been a mother that has lacked love and lacked kindness and lacked peace and lacked patience. I've used foul language. I've blown up. Like, this is like where I don't know what people do who don't have the sacrament of confession. I mean, I think the brilliance of the 12-step fellowships is that they require every member, doesn't matter what faith background you come from, to turn around and admit their wrongdoing, like to their sponsor. So they're saying to another person, I am flawed. Like, I'm irritable, I'm angry, I'm unreasonable, I'm frustrated, I've been unkind, I've spoken unkind words to I've been unforgiving. I can't tell you how many times I've said to Bishop during confession, I've been really slow to forgive Neil. I know I have to. I know I need to. I don't want to because I'm mad at him. I want him to hurt as much as I do. That's a really sad defect of character. I want him to hurt as much as he hurt me. Okay, what do I do with that? I give it to God and say, see how poverty-stricken I am, Lord. Please fill me with you, because you're not like that. And then I'm able to go home and hopefully use this gift of grace that God has given me to be a millisecond, not a millisecond, but a millimeter better than I was. It could make that much more progress in the spiritual life. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, let me ask you this question, because you talked about it yourself. So you've helped a lot of people who've suffered in addiction, either whether it's their own addiction or the addiction of a family member.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the biggest problems of our time, whether it's addiction to alcohol or drugs. I mean, the drugs are just
prevalent,
they just absolutely destroy a family.
Yeah.
Absolutely destroy a family.
Or they're an opportunity. Maybe it's an obstacle or an opportunity, Steve.
So the question is,
they transformed my family, but not without extreme pain.
So how do you do that? Where do you bring the faith into that? So, because, it's easy to say, okay, I forgive this person, but maybe there's a point where you say, how do I forgive them? What's best for them?
Okay.
It's not just saying, okay, it's okay. Sometimes you have to,
No, certain behavior is never okay.
Yeah.
Never okay. It's unacceptable behavior. But that doesn't mean we aren't asked to forgive the person.
What is your reaction?
Okay. So I think you get to the heart of the gospel. What you're saying is, like, how do we learn to love the sinner but hate the sin, right? In terms of addictions, a great analogy. And I will say that, Steve, it's really important that some of the brilliance of the 12-step fellowships that exist really talk about each of these addictions as and it's really important we hear this, a spiritual malady. that addiction is a spiritual malady. And that means if it's a spiritual malady, it has to have a spiritual solution. Fascinating, but a Jesuit priest looked at the 12 steps. The first time they were written by a man named Bill Wilson. He was in a 12-step. He had written the 12 steps for Alcoholics Anonymous. And this Jesuit looked at the 12 steps and said, oh, who are you? Went to his home and said, who are you studying St. Ignatius's rules of the rules of St. Ignatius? Who are you studying them with? And Bill Wilson looked at him and said, what are you talking about? Like, who is this man? What are you talking about? It's an incredible thing that the Holy Spirit has shown up and spoken eternal truths through Ignatius and also through Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson's language is more secular. It's spiritual, but it is not Catholic. And I find that very, very helpful, even in Catholic
Definitely
homes.
sounds religious.
It's very, yeah. Well, I'll use the term spiritual because it doesn't matter if you're Jewish, if you're Protestant, if you're Catholic, if you're Muslim, if you're there. The program can help any person from any faith background or agnostic or an atheist background to achieve freedom from addiction. That's gigantic. I mean, that's gigantic. But the means by which they do it are these incredible 12 steps. And so, yeah, my own dad, this is no secret to anyone who's heard me speak, my own dad suffered from a profound alcohol addiction for a large part of my life. I had the great, great blessing of watching that man not just, and I really emphasize this, not just get sober, but he transformed. And in a very brief period of time, because God only gave him a little less than 2 years of sobriety before he died of a tachycardia. But in that 2 years, I saw a greater transformation in my father than I could ever have conceived of as a consequence of 12 steps, okay? And so why do I mention the spiritual malady part? It speaks to something in our culture. Why are addictions so prevalent? Because the transcendent has been altogether set aside. Love of God, love of relationship with God, relationship with a spiritual life has been set aside. Yes, we've replaced it with counterfeits. New Age, I think, is a tremendous counterfeit. It's a spiritual thing, but it's not an encounter with the living God. And so what my dad was able to do is enter into a place where everybody there said to him, he said, I did this, and my addiction caused me not to get brides or wedding albums on time, and it cost people terrible consequences. My addiction caused my family members to suffer not having water for 2 weeks at a time sometimes. Caused this.
You went and showered at the JCC.
So I stole showers from other places. I ended up being a
shower thief.
A shower thief. That's a story for a different podcast, but it's a good one. It's a really good one. So I learned how not to be a Christian during addiction. Isn't that funny? But what do I tell them to do? First thing I tell them to do is to look into the 12 steps. They're transformative. They're life transformative. And there's 12 steps for people who not only are addicts, whether they're drug addicts or addicted to alcohol or addicted to gambling, addicted to pornography. But they're also separate fellowships for people who are family members of these addicts. Why? Because their relationships become so damaged as a consequence of the dishonesty and the use and the utility that happens when addiction happens, right? What do the 12 steps do? How do they help you encounter and overcome anger? They make you look at yourself. It's an incredible discovery. The journey of looking at, what's making my life unmanageable? Is it this person's addiction, or is it my attitudes and control over trying to get this person to behave? Now, I learned fascinatingly, my problem isn't that person's addiction. My problem is me. I'm exerting all my time and energy and effort into trying to get this person to behave the way I want. If I start instead redirecting my effort and energy into what is God calling me to as a person, what are my gifts, what are my talents, what do I bring to the world, then I'm not going to feel so frustrated at not getting what I want. I might not feel so resentful towards the person who's not giving me what I want. And I might start developing these incredible gifts that God has given to me to be fostered. So it takes the focus off of the other, and it helps you to stop learning control over anything. Like, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's people, places, and things. The courage to change the things I can. Me, my bad habits, and the wisdom to know the difference. It kind of redirects the whole focus. Within a family, is there going to be hardship and suffering with addiction? Yes. There's no way around it. You can press into that, or you can throw away the relationship. You throw a relationship away, you're throwing away the glory that's on the other end of this. This hardship is meant, everybody always looks at the hardship and they think that's the end of the story. That's just a chapter. It might be a number of chapters, and those chapters are filled with pain. Just look at the trilogy, the Lord of the Rings we talked about. There's a whole lot of suffering that happens before the glory that is revealed. And the thing is, I can say today that I thank God. I know this sounds crazy, and people would be like, she's nuts, she's certifiable. Well, that might be true, but it has nothing to do with this statement, okay? I'm really glad my dad was an addict. And I'm really grateful for the days I suffered under his alcoholism, because it has transformed who I am as a person, as a parent, as a daughter, as a mother, as a spouse, and as a friend. And I could not help another person who's in that kind of pain without having had the experiences that I had. It would be like saying, let's throw away this cross. Okay, well, if you throw away the cross, then you have to throw away all the glory and all the resurrection that came with it. And that's something that I can't afford to do in my life.
Well, I think in terms of counseling, if you have never experienced that, people tend to doubt what you're saying. But you could come from a point of saying, yeah, I experienced this.
But and that's the power of the fellowship. Why did my dad get better after all the times? We tried to force him into all kinds of solutions and they didn't work. Why did he finally get better when he encountered a 12-step fellowship? Because everybody around him said, yeah, Gerard, I've done the same thing you've done. Yeah, Gerard, I regret that suffering I caused. You know, when I get down and I want to drink over it, this is what has worked for me. He's in all of a sudden a communion of persons. He's in a fellowship where he is understood by people who are flawed in the same way he is flawed, who have the same weakness. And they can help him into what? The solution to that weakness. So they've said, listen, this is a spiritual problem. You need to apply a spiritual solution. And I know I struggled with God, and I've struggled with my concepts of God. And this is why people walk away from God. I'm genuinely convinced, I just said this last night to my nephew, I think atheism has existed differently in the past. I think atheism was legitimately lack of belief in God. That was what atheism was. You can see it very well portrayed in the Saints movie, St. Giuseppe Mascati. There's this intellect. He's a great doctor. He's an excellent doctor. He just doesn't have the grace of faith. He doesn't believe in a power greater than him that has actually... Okay, and today I don't think that's what the people calling themselves atheists are. I don't. When I've encountered people who call themselves atheists, if you press into you ask them questions, ask them enough questions, what you find at the end of that conversation is somebody who's really, really, really angry at God for the suffering they've encountered in their life. It's a different situation. I'm like, you're not an atheist. You're trying to punish God because you think he's at fault for the suffering in your life. That's the new atheism. And I think that's at the heart of the new atheism. Yes, you can, like Jordan Peterson said, shake your fists with righteous indignation at God that he could allow such suffering. Or you can turn around and you can say, what do I do with this? How are you asking me to die in this suffering so that you can transform me into someone far more magnificent? To be a creature on this earth that brings goodness where it lacks, brings light where it lacks, brings truth where it lacks, etc. Does that make sense when I'm saying it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the heart of the 12-step fellowships that I've experienced is they give you 12 steps to help you through that process of transformation. And one of them is look at your resentments. Look at your bitterness. Look in your home at the people that you say, no, that relationship, I haven't talked to that uncle. I haven't talked to that aunt. I haven't talked to that brother or that sister. Okay, well, then you're spiritually sick. You're a spiritually sick person. And are you willing and prepared to become spiritually well? Because you have to start there. Write down your resentments. What did they look at? What are you angry about? What did you bring to that relationship? What did it cost you? And what was the payoff? Well, if you stay angry, what's the payoff? Well, I can lord it over. I'm just a better person. That's the sin of pride. That's the sin of grandiosity. Yeah. That's the sin of self-righteousness. So essentially it gets you to look into the heart of your own heart and say, is there something about me that's led to the break of this relationship? I love this. I've been taught this. There have been times in my marriage where I would like to think, this is grandiosity speaking, like to think that I was like 1% wrong and Neil's 99.9. I'm 99% wrong if I'm going to say 1%, 99% wrong. And the 12-step fellowships will turn around and say, okay, but you're 100% responsible for that 1%. So clean it up. Wow, that's a whole way different way of looking at it. You know what I mean? Well, he hurt me more.
Again, you're making people feel really guilty.
No, and so here's the thing. You can decide what to do with that. You can either say, I feel really guilty, or, hey, Meg's had this extraordinary experience of freedom from resentment. I want that. Meg's experienced freedom from bitterness, freedom from resentment, freedom from lack of forgiveness. I want that. That isn't mine. That's not unique to Megan. That's this gift that God's given. That's this gift God freely holds out to you and to any listener who says, I haven't forgiven someone. Okay, well, there's this great gift. You can change up. You can get rid of that spiritual cancer in your heart, and choose total recovery from it. What a gift. It makes life happier. It just makes life lighter and happier. I know that in relationships that have cost me, and I've caused my daughter, each one of them, one by one, great pain in their life. There have been times that they have caused me pain in my life. I know that the pain feels awful. I know that the forgiveness, when it is accompanied with genuine, like, I don't hold anything, like, I really do fully forgive you in my heart. I know that I'm just a happier person to be around. When I'm being angry at my husband, or I'm being angry at my kid, I'm just a miserable person to be around. You get to decide what you want to be. And maybe you can set that aside and put it on the back burner for a while. Maybe it's an extended relative. Maybe it's something your dad did to you or something your mom did to you. Here's the thing. It's still going to come up when you're in the presence of that person, or when the topic of that person comes up. There's an ugliness that just accompanies it, a negativity, a lack of joy, a lack of freedom, a lack of happiness. What do you want to do about that? You might have reduced it to it's only 1% of my life. Well, do you want to be an integrated person? Do you want God to enter into that 1% of you? Because I do. And the gift my Father has given me, I know I can forgive really great wrongdoings. I know I can see the goodness of a man who cost me great suffering. And I do see his goodness. He did some remarkable things in recovery. He became a very good self-gift a father even to me. And I think he led me to the spiritual fathers I have today.
Did he maintain his faith through the addiction?
That is such a good question. Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I often think this is funny. I don't know what his faith life looked on the inside, interiorly. I can say I can remember my dad stumbling drunk, I can remember looking in his bedroom and seeing him get on a knee and try. Now, he had a hard time getting back off of his knees, okay? But that man got on his knees and he was saying something to God, prayers. And he may not have really had relationship. He may have been saying rote prayers he learned from his childhood. I can't tell you that, because only that his heart is known to him and God alone. I can tell you that he did. Other members of the family did not. And I think that I, at that point, said to God, oh, you're really busy in the Middle East because you're sure not answering my prayers. And my prayers were, get him sober. Okay, what's behind that prayer? Not my willing his good. That was like, get rid of this cross in my life. Yeah. That's what I was telling God, get rid of this cross in my life. And he was saying, not yet, Megan. And I was understanding his remaining drunk as no from God. And I was so mistaken. He was saying, not yet, Megan. I can't tamper with his self-will. I can't tamper with his freedom, his human freedom. I'm not going to tamper with his human freedom. But I have things in place at work right now. And these relationships are going to get hard and they're going to be rich, but you are going to learn to love rightly as a consequence of this hardship. And this is why I think Christians get it so wrong. They think love is sentimentality. Love is always supposed to feel good and feel warm. No, it did not feel warm and good on the cross. It just didn't. That was not. When the good thief and the bad thief turned to Christ, and one said, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Christ didn't have all these warm, fuzzy feelings. He was in agonizing pain to get this man where he wanted this man, which was in heaven. He said, today you shall be with me in paradise. But it was costing him greatly. On the other side, he's got the other thief laughing and laughing in Christ's face and saying, ha ha, now why don't you, well, if you're God, why don't you get us down off the cross? The suffering that Christ endured to try to win relationship with us, that's literally the heart of what we're supposed to bring into the Christian family. And so when my dad makes it hard, he's giving me an opportunity to love in a big way. And today I can say, like, okay, in that relationship, I've learned how to do it. There's other relationships in my life where I haven't learned how to do it as well yet. And it's a process, and I want to really get there. But my dad, he was a gift. And he cost me greatly. And I love him dearly.
You know, the thief who was the good thief was named Saint Dismas. Yeah. And my very talented friend, who's a mathematician but a phenomenal musician, he was going through these classes at the Berklee School of Music. And he had to write a country song. And he wrote a song whose main lyric was, "Ain't done nothing but love you." So it sounds like a romantic thing, but it was about Saint Dismas.
That's fantastic.
Because he always said, in some sense, it was his favorite saint because all he did for that one moment was love Christ, right? He didn't. His life was bad. He failed constantly, right? I mean, you're a thief your whole life. You know, he wasn't living a good life, but all he did was love Christ. Right.
I love that. And you want to know something? It's funny you say that, but I've taken secular music into retreats with youth, and I've played them this love song, and I've said, no, but I want you to listen to it. And I want you to listen to it as one hearing God singing this to you. And you have kids sitting in the pews crying their eyes out, right? One of the things I think I'll say to you, the other thing I love is what Fulton Sheen says about St. Dismas. It's really great. He says, there were two sinners crucified next to Christ. One got to heaven, the other didn't. One prayed, the other didn't. What's interesting about St. Dismas is, and this is an important lesson in the spiritual life, we just need to never give up prayer. Mm-hmm. I mean, St. Dismas was in agony. Think about the pain he was in. He was in a real pain. Now, he could have shook his fist like the other thief and said, God, see, you don't really exist. You don't exist, or I wouldn't be in this situation. All this like bitterness and this hatred and, you don't care about me, or I wouldn't. And St. Dismas just said, don't forget you made me. Don't forget who I am. Don't forget me. This is a prayer. It's all a prayer. It wasn't even it was remember me.
But he also
acknowledged that God is God.
He acknowledges that he had wrongdoing.
Right. Exactly. Remember me.
So after all, we deserve this.
Yes,
he says, right?
He does. But he basically says, like, just remember me. He doesn't even ask for eternity.
Yeah.
He's just like, think well of me.
Yeah.
Think of me. Think of me. He doesn't even say think well of me. He just think of me. God just wants us to ask him to just remember that he thinks of us.
And then
he thinks
to
of
have
us all the
have
time.
it said to you, this day you'll be with me in paradise.
Think about that is a perfect experience. So you remember you talked about the mercy of God, the heart of mercy. If you want to look at the heart of mercy, look at that one line in Scripture.
That enables him to go through this unbelievably awful thing, right? He's being crucified and he's able to take it because he knows it's finite, right? And after that he's going to get to be in heaven with God, right? What could be better?
But also, think about this. Dismas, you may not have done a real good job following me.
Yeah.
But today you and I are going to be very close.
Yeah.
We're going to be together in heaven.
It's an acceptance of God. The other thief rejects God, as you say, is right there. I think that's, as you
Beautiful.
talked about atheists
he unites
before.
himself to God. Dismas does on the cross.
I'm not saying this is all atheists, but there is a run of atheism now where it's people who just want to do something they know is wrong. And so they reject God to set themselves up as God. My ethic is more important than yours, right? So
we're only ever bitter about the rules we want to break.
I want to be selfish. I want to be this. I want to be that.
I love that you said that. Because to be honest with you, the other thing I've found it truly, and this is a real temptation, I think, for people, God made us in his image and likeness. Okay? It says God who is, our thoughts are not his thoughts. Our ways are not his ways. We can't begin to plumb the depths, the thoughts, the mystery of God. Okay, we're made in his image. But what have we done? Many times we try to recreate him in our image. We say, okay, well, I like this piece about God. I like this piece about God. So my God, I love that my God, and then they list the attributes of their God. But suddenly their God has done away with any kind of expectation that they should be, forgiving, or they should be pure of heart, or they should be. I think, well, that's very convenient. Yeah. Now, say we apply parenting to that. And my kids, if we apply that to the analogy of parenting, then my children get to decide, listen, as a parent, you're going to do away with this expectation and this expectation and this expectation, this expectation. You're just going to have the expectations that I really like and I agree with and are okay for me.
Yeah.
Just that. So then we'll get along beautifully. And then I say, yes, and you'll be a terrible person. Because why? You haven't lived to your greatest potential.
Yeah.
You haven't lived to your... God the Father, does he have standards? Of course he does, but any good parent does. If you turn around and say, listen, I'm not going to expect you to be honest because it's hard for you. I'm going to expect you to lie for the rest of your life, and you're going to be dishonest, and you're going to be deceitful, and you're going to be a thief because you're really not capable of it. So let's just let you be. Oh my God, what a terrible father, right? Yeah. A terrible mother. Instead we say, no, that's wrong. I'm calling you higher. Mm-hmm. No, that's selfish. It hurts people when you do that. They have a right to the truth, right? So essentially, God the Father is merely doing by asking us, calling us to a standard. He's just being a good parent. That's all he's doing. And do kids resent their parents?
He never interrupts with your freedom. He never forgets you. So he's not going to force you.
And he loves you even when you say no to all of what he's asked of you.
That's what sometimes I even feel bad for praying for people who aren't working for themselves. Like if, I don't know, like person A is doing nothing to benefit themselves in this struggle. And I feel bad like asking God to just take it away. Like, so to take away your dad's alcoholism, even though he's doing nothing to do it, right? It's almost like saying, come on, just violate his human freedom. Just for me, right? Consider me more important than him, and just,
take this cross away from me.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So it's like a disingenuous prayer that you're just saying, I know these are the rules, but can't you just violate it?
Right.
It's like, it's just like saying, can't you just let me win the lottery? Because then if I win the lottery, I don't have to worry about money for the rest of my life, right? Where we know, I mean, if there's one thing that's certain about winning the lottery, is 99 times out of 100 it wrecks their life, exactly. Right? I mean, this never fixes things. It's always a disaster, right? Almost always a disaster.
But I think Stephen, that it's funny. But what we're saying, and this is always, I used to pick up. I remember picking up Imitation of Christ and looking at the title of the chapters. And towards the end of the book, one of the titles of the chapters kind of leaped out at me, and it said, "For those few friends of the cross." I'm like, what's that mean? For those few lovers of the cross. I'm like, what's that mean? But having hung on the cross, I can honestly say I'm not yet there, and I want to be there. Yeah. There's a lot of times when I'm on the cross, and the only thing I say to Jesus is when's this over? I just want down. If it's a broken relationship with a family member, or if it's if there's a struggle in there, I just want off. I just want down. And so slowly but surely, my prayer has become, God, I know that this cross is good. Help me to see its goodness. Grant me the patience and the long suffering I need to bear it well. See, there's a difference. So my prayer's matured a little bit. A little bit. It's funny, but the people closest to me would say, yeah, it's because I remind her she has to pray that way. And that's true. I have to go to people when I'm in suffering. But that idea that you're saying that, God doesn't interfere with human freedom, it's because he knows that even if my dad schleps it up, he can bring extraordinary good out of an abuse of human freedom. Oh, this is the mystery of God. Only God can take something that's tremendously wrong, evil, and bad, and bring a greater good out of that evil than if the evil had never occurred. We see this this is literally the story of Genesis. Adam and Eve were supposed to behave themselves. They were given a set of standards. They were told not to do one thing. And when they did it, what was the result? God brought about intimate communion with him. Now we don't see him face to face. Now we don't just speak to him face to face. We receive him into our very being so that we might be transformed by him. That's insane. There's one form of intimacy, Adam talking face to face with God. Now I have the intimacy in which I receive the heart of the divine, the triune God, and it transforms who I am as a human person.
Well, there's this thought in one of the church fathers, an Eastern Eastern church father. And he said his idea was that heaven and hell are the same thing. What it is you're experiencing God. So if
The
you
absence of or the union with.
if you see God
Yes.
and you want to be there, then this is just like
That's union.
this is the best that you could possibly have. And if your freedom, you in your freedom, you've chosen to hate this, then you look at this, it's just the most awful thing in the world, right? Because it's going against you, it's going against what you have, and so you withdraw from that union. It's almost, I always say to people that I think the best way to tell, like, if your life is on path, is walk into a church, stand in front of the tabernacle. If you feel drawn, and you really feel drawn, then that's a good thing. If you're thinking, I got to get out of here, then that's when you know, right? Like when people always say this jokingly, like, oh, if I walk into a church, I'll be struck by lightning or something like this, right? You know you're on the wrong path, then get on the right path.
Now, here, I'm going to temper that with something, though. I'm going to temper that with something. I am. Because I have a beautiful, beautiful daughter who yesterday, she's a beautiful 19-year-old who just said to me, and this is a child, she's an adult. She's an adult woman who has a very beautiful, disciplined prayer life. She has a big cross right now. And she said, Mom, when I go to Mass, she goes to daily Mass, when I go to Mass, I don't feel anything anymore. And I said, listen, this is where our culture has run amok with feelings. And feelings aren't facts. Anorexic girls feel fat. Feelings aren't facts. Okay? It's really important to distinguish between a fact and a feeling. You're not feeling close to God doesn't mean you are not close to Him. And that's the whole principle behind desolation and consolation. You feel really close to God when you're in consolation. But people like St. John of the Cross have said, you're really close to God in desolation. He feels so far away, but He's actually very close to you. So I do agree with what you're saying. Like, I think part of it is
but she's not going
sin
to feel
makes you miserable.
I have to run away from the tabernacle.
Right. Sin makes you miserable.
Like
basically,
not feeling like I felt before.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that I just think sin makes you restless, discontented, and miserable. Now, desolation has a similar feeling because it is the actual sensate experience of God. You feel almost as though God has withdrawn Himself from you. Mm-hmm. That's a horrible feeling. What you do in that moment, like, do you draw closer to Him in spite of the feeling? I think that's what made Mother Teresa of Calcutta such an extraordinary saint, is that she went through 40 plus years of her life not having any experience of the consoling presence of God. And yet she kept drawing near to Him. So even that sinner who walks into the tabernacle, if that sinner walks into the tabernacle and doesn't feel himself drawn to the tabernacle, just remain there.
Yeah.
Just remain there and say to God, I'm here because I want to be with you. Haven't been with you. Maybe I haven't chosen you, but I'm choosing you now.
It's still their choice.
Yeah, big time. And you know what? This is why marriages fail. Sentimentality. Marriages fail because when the marriage gets to a place where it's hit a winter, and all of the best marriages do, they're going to why God is testing the two people's love and the degree of their selfishness. If you are only there when it feels good, the consolation parts of marriage, anybody can say for those, that is no test of your character. When the winters hit, and when the desolation is in the heart of the marriage, what do you do in that marriage? Do you punish the person? Well, maybe you need to get your butt to confession. Do you mistreat the person? It happens in every marriage. Get to confession. Do you draw near to prayer and ask God to help you to love more deeply the person? Now you're getting the Christian life. The feelings still don't match up, but you're getting the Christian life right, because while those feelings are there, you're drawing to God and saying, you love me when I'm like this in my marriage with you. Now show me how to love the way you do in my marriage with this person. That is such an opportunity. And sentimentally speaking, it feels crummy. And it's also this incredible gift by God. Like, Meg, I'm putting you in the fire. It's a fire of purification. It's not about you. It's not about you. His not making you feel good. It's not about you. It's about you and me. Can you love even when the feelings that He has given you are painful? Well, I want to. And the beautiful thing is my husband has modeled this so much better in our marriage than I have many times. He's loved me when I'm utterly unbearable.
Well, you give them lots of opportunities.
I do, 100 daily, my friend, daily. But isn't that beautiful? Because then I get to learn to encounter Christ. I've encountered Christ in Neil, and then I've learned what I want to bring to the marriage, which is this encounter of mercy when my husband has wronged me. It's a very beautiful walk. It's messy. I remember going to Bishop Doherty and crying my eyes out, like, I want to be a saint, but I'm just so blah, 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 blah. And he said, Megan, do you see that statue? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, do you know what it looked like before it was a statue? There was a lot of chiseling. There was a lot of mess on the floor as the artist was chiseling away. There was powder dropping chunks of granite, chunks. He's like, do you understand what it took to make that masterpiece? It didn't look pretty for a while, is my point,
Yeah.
And like, so the greatest, most holy, most beautiful marriages are based on hardship and overcoming hardship with mercy, forgiveness, and love.
I think a lot of marriages end now, and they don't even have a reason why. It's just...
It got hard.
Sentimentally
speaking. I love when they say the feelings are no longer there, and I want to say, do you know how many times any relationship can say that? Do you walk away from a child because your feelings about the child are negative?
But that's the thing. They do
that
damage.
Makes you a bad
They do damage
parent.
to children.
That's it. If you're going to walk away from your child because the child gives you unpleasant feelings, well, then you don't know how to love, right? And so we have to take that that mentality of disposability in marriage and apply it to other things, and say like, ooh, I met this remarkable woman yesterday. I was on the atrium, the courtyard of UPMC. It's the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and essentially, what was on that courtyard were children with profound crosses, real hardships. I mean, I saw a little 2-year-old, and she had no hair, and she was obviously undergoing cancer treatment. And I saw its mom, and its mom was so tender with the child. And I thought to myself, I wonder if the tenderness that mother has is a consequence of watching the child suffering, or if she's always been this tender. That was just a thought I had, right? And then this woman, my nephew's son, Charlie, I was watching Charlie on the roof of this atrium, and Charlie wanted to go and see this child who looked very much like so many of the beautiful young children up at St. Joseph's here, St. Joseph's in Scranton, who are massive disabilities. And Charlie wanted to go see this child, so I brought Charlie. Charlie's little, he's a little baby. And he came over and he's pointing at this child. And I came over and I said to the mother, I said, this is Charlie, and Charlie wanted to meet your beautiful son. She said, oh, this is my son, Ryan. And I said, well, hello, Ryan. Hi, Charlie, wave. And Charlie's waving at Ryan. And Ryan is profoundly handicapped and has a profound disability. And the mother and I spoke throughout the next few hours as we were there, in and out. And then the conversation suddenly took a very deep turn. And the mother said, I don't know how it came around. I said something like, something about her beauty, her tenderness with her son, Ryan. And she said, oh, he's a gift. Oh, he's a gift. And I said, yes, everyone placed on our path is if we have eyes to see. And she said, well, I haven't always had eyes to see. And she said, you see, he wasn't always like this. And I said, oh. And she said, up until 11 months, he was a perfectly healthy, normal baby. He was in a car seat. I was in my car. I was in a car wreck, and I drove he and I into a retaining pond, a pond that was there for animals. It was a retaining pond for animals, and it hadn't been drained, and it was due to be drained that day after 2 p.m. And my son I couldn't rescue him, couldn't get him out. And she said, when they got him out, when he was finally taken out, the consequence of that accident, my accident, that was that many surgeries, and he is as he is today. And I said, wow. that must have been unspeakably painful. And she said, oh, it was. It was. And she said, I turned my back on God for a bit. And she said, but that never works because it impacts the misery. Like, basically, it just profoundly multiplied her misery, her negativity, her sadness, her sorrow. And she said, it took a lot of praying for me to crawl out of that hole. A lot of praying to crawl out of that hole. And she said, but I see the goodness of God. And I can see how he's even brought goodness out of what has happened. That, my friends, is the Christian journey to sainthood. I mean, I walked away and I said, oh my God, that she's encountered the mystery of suffering. And she has looked into this profound darkness to try to find God in it. And she has encountered the change and the transformation in herself as a consequence of this son. Is that ever, so we want our son to be profound? No. But there was an incredible lesson, Steve, for me in that. There was an incredible lesson in that the Christian journey is going to be filled with suffering. It's what do we do when we encounter it? And we can say, God is wrong, and shake our fist. Or, God, this feels really wrong, and only you can bring great good out of it. And you're going to have to make me trust you again, because I'm not there. That's an invitation. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, that seems like a perfect place to end at that high point. Thank you very much, Megan Murphy.
It was a joy. Thank you.
Thank you.